Hey everybody. Hello, 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 hello. Thank you guys for trusting. Hey, Uda. You want to come on in and be the judge, Uda? Uda, I'm going to send you the transcript so you can be the judge, Uda. Uda, I'm sending you the transcript right now so you could be the judge. Sure am. Just right now. There it is right there, Uda. I just emailed it to you. Ah, all right, y'all. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Infamous Sylvia channel where we are doing the reenactment of today. We're going to try to focus on one. I'm going to join the live with y'all tonight. Okay. Let me put the link in. Hold on. Let me put the link in since Uda said he wants to join the live. Hold on a second. Yeah, I know Uda is a trip. You know he a trip, y'all. He a trip. All right. Without further ado, y'all, we got our folks up in the chat. We got our people. We got our people up in the chat. Let me bring up my actors. Mimi, she's in the house.
What's up, people?
Mimi, oh Lord, she got one of those Obama internet. Lord have mercy.
What's up, people?
What's up? And we have JC is in the house. Izzy is in the house. Hello,
Hey y'all, how you guys doing?
y'all. They here. The actors are here. We're waiting for one more actor here, but we waiting. We was hoping Mr. Uda would come on in and join us, but we'll see. We'll see. She's Maya says she doesn't get the notification for us. Maya, you didn't get. Oh my God. All right, y'all. You guys are ready. I'm still waiting for my girl to come on in, and she's not in. But don't hate on the free phone. Well, the free phone needs to start working. All right, so let me just tell you guys what I did today. I went around taking a poll, right, and I'm going to take a poll with you guys tonight. But one of the poll I took, and I was asking attorneys in regarding to the psychiatrist, right, and I got some response, right, and guess what? Because I asked, do you think the psychiatrist is telling the truth about when she says she don't know much about the case except the beginning part, right? Well, this is what was told to me. This is one attorney says this to me. This is what the attorney said when I was I don't know why it was sent. Lord have mercy. Oh my Lord, y'all. My people. I apologize, y'all. I'm having one of my actors is asking me to send her the text message or the link, and I send it to her and the things. I don't know. I sent it to her. Uda! What's up, dude? What's up, dude?
Yeah.
Oh, so you got one of those Obama connection too? You got one of those Obama connections? You going in and out, sir? Oh, see, he kicked him out. But listen. Oh my God. All right.
Miss Sylvia, let me ask you a quick question. Now, you said we're starting 2067, 2068. 2068 is direct, which is going to be the government questioning Miss Hughes. Are we starting there? Is that where you want us to start?
Start from the beginning. 2067.
Well, 2067 is
It says we'll bring out the witness. If you need, see it in the middle of the page. Guys, we need to be prepared from now on, guys. People having a fit in the chat. That folks, crash out Queen, just Google Diddy's trial and you'll find out who's covering it. Just Google Diddy's trial. She's asking who else is covering the trial. Just Google Diddy's trial and you'll see who's covering it. All right. Okay, you guys ready? But as I was saying, I did a poll with some attorneys, and this is what I was told. I was told that I asked, do you think the psychiatrist is lying? And the consensus I got is, oh, absolutely. And they said that lady gets paid to tell the government's narrative. 60% of her income comes from being an expert witness. So that is what the consensus is from attorneys that I interviewed. Okay. And by the way, those attorneys are not prosecutors. They're all defense attorneys. That's what I was told. Thank you, big play pro. No, that wasn't Brian Steele. That was not Brian Steele that told me that, Toya. Okay, y'all ready? Everybody, you guys, I wanted to give them a little time for them to get together. You guys ready, ladies? Ladies, you ready?
Yes.
All right.
Page 72. Oh my goodness.
No, I gave you page 2.
It's 72, but it's 26. It's 72
Ma'am,
on our.
just go in the top corner, 2067. That's the easiest way because sometimes it changes up the other way. All right. You could have just.
So who is who, Miss Sylvia?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it the same way?
Same position.
Okay, we're doing. Okay, so I'm judge. All right, no problem.
Yes, ma'am. Y'all keep your same position. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I apologize, but my people, I'll get my folks together, y'all. I apologize. Okay, you ready, y'all, ladies?
67.
And we're gonna start at 17, line 17. Okay, y'all? Page 267, line 17. Guys, you ready?
Yepers.
Your Honor, the government calls Dr. Dawn Hughes.
The witness may approach. Dawn Hughes, called as a witness by the government, having been duly sworn, testified as follows. The court, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mm. Good morning, Dr. Hughes.
Good morning.
Dr. Hughes, what is your profession?
I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist.
What is a clinical psychology? What is clinical psychology?
So, clinical psychology is basically the study of human behavior, of both normal and abnormal human behavior. Clinical psychologists assess and treat and evaluate individuals who are having difficulties in their life, from problems of living to major psychiatric and mental disorders. Psychological, dang, I can't talk. Psychologists can also teach and conduct research as well.
What is forensic psychology?
Forensic psychology is just the application of the science and principles of clinical psychology to a particular legal question.
Can you please describe your general educational background?
Yes, I received my Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology at College, which is upstate New York. I received my Master's of Science and my doctorate degree in clinical psychology at Nova Southeastern University, which is in Florida. I had to do my 4 year intensive internship to attain the PhD, and that was at Yale University in their School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry. And there I have a full 2 4 year rotations. Instead of breaking it up, I had 1 full year rotation at a substance abuse treatment unit run by Yale, and then the other one was at the West Haven Mental Health Clinic, where we treated individuals with more severe and persistent mental illness. After that, I came back up to New York and had to complete my postdoctoral fellowship in order to amass a number of hours to get licensed in the state of New York. And that was at Will Cornell Medical College on the east side. And then there I worked in the dependent department of psychiatry, as well in the anxiety and post-traumatic stress program. Jeez.
Dr. Hughes, can you please describe generally your training and experience in psychology and trauma?
Yes. My training in the trauma is fairly unique because I've almost always had training in trauma. I started working in a domestic violence survivors program that was housed within a community mental health center during graduate school. And there we was saw individuals who were coming in for treatment. We treated females, women who were victims of domestic violence, but we also had to access the treatment and treat men who were court ordered for treatment for having battered or beaten their partners. So I was treating both for that 4 year. I also worked somewhat overlapped at the Child Sex Abuse Survivors Program. I was the research coordinator for that program, and that was where individuals who had had childhood abuse were coming to the clinic to get help for the abuse to help heal from the traumatic effects of that victimization. And there I conduct a lot of research that and data on those individuals so we could learn better about their experiences and how we could better help them. After that, I worked at the Veterans Administration in the outpatient unit. Again, continuing that vein of trying to understand how trauma affects different people in different walks of life. And I'm dating myself. So back at that time, I was able to treat individuals who were in World War II, which was such an honor, and also treat Vietnam era veterans and then veterans from the first Gulf War at that time. After that, I was, as I started, I was at Yale University on an internship. And there I was in the substance abuse treatment unit. And because we know that there is a high degree of concurrence between substance use disorders and trauma-based disorders, myself and my co-intern, who also had trauma training, we developed a group for female individuals who were heroin addicts. They were in recovery from heroin use, and they had some kind of abuse or trauma in childhood or adulthood. And we ran a group for them all as well. And then also at Will Cornell at the Anxiety and Traumatic Stress Program, that's where I was seeing adolescents and ultimate adults who had experienced either rape or sexual assault or physical assault or children neglect or abuse in that program.
Dr. Hughes, what do you do professionally?
So I'm currently in the independent practice in New York City.
What does your independent practice entail?
So I looked at it as three main areas. One main area is the clinical area where I treat individuals in therapy. I have an active clinical practice, 2.5 days a week, where individuals are coming to me to deal with their problems that they have, struggling with traumatic effects of victimization or abuse of violence that they experience. The other part I do is forensic psychology part. So something that I'm doing here today. I also access individuals who are involved in criminal or civil matters and write reports for the court and confer with attorneys on cases, and then sometimes I testify in court. And then the third part of what I do is I'm on a faculty at Will Cornell. I'm a clinical assistant professional in the Department of Psychiatry there, and means I'm supervising as intern. I'm participating in teaching the program, and I'm doing other types of academic things. This is called voluntary position, which is what academic medical institutions do, which means you don't get paid for that. You just give your time back. So that's one of the things I do. And then the other part of the third bucket is I'm engaged in our professional organizations in the American psychological associations and the trauma division specifically, and spend time because I'm on the board doing things with the organization as well, with that organization as well, which also is not a paid position.
You have said a lot, Dr. Hughes. I am going to ask you to slow down a little bit. I want to make sure that the jury is able to take in everything you're saying. Asking a few follow up questions with respect to your clinical practice specifically. Specifically, can you describe for the jury what that entails?
That entails people coming to my office for individual psychotherapy. Most of them, but not all, but a good majority of them have had some kind of violence or abuse in their lives, either having sexually assaulted or having been a objection.
That's overruled. But Dr. Hughes, just make sure that you are listening to the questions asked and that you stay within those questions.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry. I believe you were saying that you primarily treat victims of trauma. Is that correct in your clinical practice?
That's correct.
In your forensic practice, just briefly, what does that entail?
That entails conducting sometimes comprehensive psychological assessments of individuals who are involved in criminal and civil matters.
And with respect to your teaching position at Well Cornell, again, just briefly, what does that include?
So the teaching part is I teach an ethics seminar for the incoming interns. I teach ad hoc seminars for the interns or HOC seminars. I do supervision of an extern who is in the military families program who is treating some of our military members. I supervise them. And I field the ethics calls and traumas or violence calls from our faculty when they need consultation.
Earlier, you mentioned a few professional organizations that you're a member of. Can you describe the organizations that you're a member of professionally and any leadership roles that you have in those organizations?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I'm a member of the American Psychological Association, and that's the largest part of Psychologist. That's a lot. And because it's so big, it's broken down into different divisions. And one of the divisions is the division of trauma psychology. And that division was founded in 2007. I was one of the founding members advocating for APA to have this division. I serve in many leadership roles, and I'm just rotating off as the past president of the organization. I am I also am part of trauma organizations, the International Society of Traumatic Stress Studies, the International Society of Trauma and Disassociation. I'm a member of New York State Psychological Association, the Anxiety Disorders of America Association, and a local women's mental health consortium, which is based here in New York City.
Dr. Hughes, what, if any, areas do you specialize in?
I specialize in interpersonal violence and traumatic stress.
What is interpersonal violence?
So interpersonal violence, objection.
Sustained.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may. Instead of that, let's have a very brief sidebar. Mr. Bob, you have no objections to this witness qualifications?
I do not.
I think you can qualify the witness as an expert, and then let's get into the actual opinions.
Thank you. Your Honor, just a couple more questions for the jury.
Of course.
Thank you. Dr. Hughes, are you familiar with traumatic stress?
Yes, I am.
What generally does that include?
Traumatic stress is a psychological outcome, one psychological outcome that someone can have from sustaining a traumatic event, such as domestic violence, rape, sexual assault. Judge, objection.
That's overruled. Let's keep it moving.
Do you have experience in that area, Dr. Hughes?
Yes, I do.
And in total, approximately, how many years have you practiced as a psychologist dealing with trauma and traumatic stress?
I think it's close to 30 years now.
During that time, approximately how many trauma victims or victims of sexual abuse have you treated?
Probably thousands at this point.
And are you a board certified forensic psychologist
Yes, I am.
at a very high level? What does that mean?
That means that I have amassed the highest degree of board certification that psychologists, I mess it up every time, can have, meaning that you have demonstrated a certain competency and excellence in the field of forensic psychology.
And are you licensed in various jurisdictions to practice psychology?
Yes, I am.
Can you just outline what those jurisdictions are?
Sure. I'm licensed in New York, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, and in North Carolina.
Have you previously been qualified in the field of forensic psychology to give testimony as an expert witness?
Uh, yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
I think it's approximately 60, 65 times in court.
Again, what jurisdictions, if you could list them?
Sure. In New York, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, in Connecticut, in Virginia, And I think in the federal court in the Southern District here and the Eastern District and then the Northern District of New York.
Have you ever not been qualified as an expert?
No.
Your Honor, at this time we offer Dr. Hughes as an expert in clinical and forensic psychology with specializations in trauma and traumatic stress.
No objection.
The witness will be accepted on that basis. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hughes, are you aware of press and news reporting relating to the allegations in this case?
On a very brief level, yes.
Can you describe what you're aware of?
Objection.
Sustained.
Do you have any personal knowledge of the facts of this case?
I do not.
Have you reviewed any evidence in this case?
I have not.
Have you interviewed the defendant?
I have not.
Have you interviewed any government victims or witnesses in this case?
I have not.
Dr. Hughes, why have you not assessed any victims or witnesses in this case?
Because it's my understanding that under the law, I am not permitted to do so. Objection.
Sustained.
Your Honor, can I have a brief sidebar on this issue?
Yes.
Thank you. Your Honor, the reason I elicited that question is because it is my understanding that we had discussed this in court previously, and given the expected testimony of someone like Dr. Barty,
What was the question?
what's her understanding about why she can't interview any of the witnesses or victims in this case?
She cannot testify about that. I thought I was pretty clear when this issue came up that she can't testify about it, nor can Dr. Bardley address that issue.
I misunderstood, Your Honor. Dr. Hughes, a moment ago, you said that you have seen press at a very high level in this case. Is that right?
Yes.
Without telling me any of the substance of what you reviewed, have you seen any details about what's been happening in court?
No, I haven't.
You testified a moment ago, Dr. Hughes, that you have not interviewed any witnesses or victims in this case. Is that right?
That's correct.
And how, if at all, will that affect your ability to testify regarding any particular witness or victim?
Objection.
Sustained.
What is your under what is your understanding of what your role is here today for the jury?
So my role here today is to provide expert witness testimony as a blind expert. That means I don't know anything about the case or the players or the witnesses. And to provide the ladies and gentlemen of the jury of some things that we know in the field about domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, and traumatic issues. Or traumatic stress.
On what topics is your testimony expected to be about today?
I'm really going to address four main topics. One of them is do individuals, how do we understand why individuals stay in a relationship mirrored with domestic violence? The second is how do individuals cope when they are in those relationships? The third is what are the pattern of disclosure? How do victims finally tell about the abuse? And then the fourth category is what we do about memory for traumatic events.
Dr. Hughes, you referenced earlier a term domestic violence. Can you very briefly define what you're referring to?
Sure. Domestic violence is commonly defined as a pattern of behavior that functions to instill fear and to control. It is using multiple abusive behaviors such as Objection to the subject.
Sustained. I think we can move on.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hughes, today when you testified using particular terms, will those terms be defined based on the psychological literature?
Yes, that's correct.
Just to be clear, will those terms be based in any way on legal definitions of those concepts?
No, not at all.
Dr. Hughes, have you been retained by the government to testify here today?
Yes, I have.
And have you been retained in other cases by the government?
I have.
Have you been retained in some other cases by defense attorneys?
Yes, I have.
Are you being compensated for your work in this case?
Yes, I have.
And what is your hourly rate?
$600 an hour.
What is your rate for a court testimony?
I think it's 6,000 for day.
Does that amount that you get paid depend in any way on the outcome of this trial?
No, not at all.
Dr. Hughes, turning to our first topic of why victims stay in relationships. Based on your clinical experience and review of the academic literature, do victims at times remain in abusive relationships?
Yes, they do. And it's important to understand that they don't remain in the relationship because they are unconcerned about the violence. They don't remain because they want to be abused. No victims want to be abused, and anyone can be abused. Strong people, people with vulnerabilities, smart people, people who have other difficulties and deficiencies, and we know that domestic violence cross race, ethnicity, sex, gender. Objection.
Just objection? Then I'll ask if there are grounds for the objection. What are the grounds briefly?
Stay within the four corners of the question.
That's fair. Dr. Hughes, if you have a direct question, just give a direct answer, and Miss Steiner will follow up if she needs to. Okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Based on, again, your clinical experience and your review of the literature, how common is it for a victim to remain in an abusive relationship?
So it was very common.
Can you please describe what the academic literature states about why victims do stay in abusive relationships?
Yes. So there is three main categories that the research has looked at. This is a question that has explored extensively over the last 40, 50 years. And the three main kind of areas are: one, they stay in the relationship because it's not just about hitting. It's about using a lot of different abusive behaviors that make a victim feel entrapped in the relationship and those abusive behaviors. It can be physical abuse, physical violence, but it's also psychological abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse, surveillance behaviors, and all of those behaviors conspire together to keep the victim trapped in the relationship and make it feel like they can't leave. Secondly, we know that in these types of relationships, there is almost always love and attention and attraction and companionship. And it's those positive feelings that when they get paired with the violence and the abuse make it very difficult for the victim to see their way out. It creates an intense psychological bond, an attachment with their abuser that makes it difficult for them to leave. And the third bucket, the third reason we know why individuals have a hard time leaving a relationship is because of the psychological consequences from the abuse itself. We know in the psychiatric and psychological literature that exposure to repeated acts of violence and sexual assault results in significant psychological disorders and symptoms. And that makes it difficult for the individuals to have higher order planning to leave.
And again, briefly, Dr. Hughes, when you say higher order of planning to leave. Can you define what you mean by that?
Sure. In order to leave a very complex, difficult situation, it's hard for us to break up with someone under the best of circumstances. And then when you have all this violence and abuse, you're just trying to kind of live day by day in this micro way of trying to avoid being hit, avoid being yelled at, avoid being hurt. And that interferes with all these other resources. We need to think about how am I going to get out of this relationship?
And the first area of study, Dr. Hughes, that you just mentioned is you said there's a combination of types of abuse and it's not just about hitting. Can you briefly explain what you mean when you say it's not just about hitting?
Right. Because it's about the power and control that the abuser has over the victim. And the hitting is just some tool that the abuser uses. The abuser uses other tools such as psychological abuse. Objection.
Let's move on. Miss Steiner, next question.
Yes, Your Honor. Turning first to the physical abuse, the hitting, what effect does that have on a victim's ability to leave a relationship?
So when we are hit, harmed, beat up, the normal human emotion that gets arisen is fear. We feel scared, and it's very hard to take that fear away once you've been hit. So what happens is the brain organized around the fear, and that fear is now organized around the relationship. So there's always sort of walking on eggshells, trying not to do something to get hit. Once again, the resources are now being devoted to how do I stay safe in this relationship and not over here? How do I do all these things I need to do to get out?
And specifically, what is it about this fear reaction that you're describing that makes it difficult for a victim to leave a relationship?
So, fear is also a very deliberating emotion. When you feel anxiety, sort of butterflies in your stomach, that's the low level fear. When you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die on this roller coaster, that's the high level fear. So, if you're in high level arousal and high level fear, you're not really able to start thinking about these other big deal things on your plate that you have to do, like leaving an abusive relationship.
How often does physical abuse need to happen in order to make it difficult for a victim to leave a relationship?
It doesn't have to happen all the time. We know that once someone has shown us not only the ability, but the willingness to use violence against us, that link has been set. Like our brains don't forget. We know that it can be forthcoming. And then with that other type of behaviors, the threats, the control, and the put downs, that can solidify and reinforce that threats even without using more physical violence.
Dr. Hughes, you also mentioned earlier that psychological abuse can be a factor. How does psychological abuse cause a victim to remain in a relationship?
So, psychological abuse is about threatening future violence and about controlling your victim. So, when you're doing things that the abuser doesn't want you to do, there are negative consequences for that. That could be physically violent acts or that can be other acts. So, the physical psychological violence looks like intimidation, like threats, like throwing things, like telling you where you can go and what you can do. Objection.
Hold on for just one moment. Dr. Hughes, is it the same objection?
Same objection and the court's ruling.
I'm going to strike the witness last answer. Miss Steiner, can you re-ask the question that you did ask?
I will, Your Honor. Dr. Hughes, very briefly and at a high level, can you describe how psychological abuse can cause a victim to remain in a relationship?
So, because psychological abuse is so controlling, it makes the victim feel entrapped in that relationship. It makes her feel afraid because of threats she can't get out. It makes her feel intimidated to make choices to get out because of that fear.
What effect does that have on the victim?
It has a tremendous amount of psychological distress. When you're always trying to figure out what abuse behavior is coming at me and at which time, this proverbial feeling of walking on eggshells and not knowing what's coming next.
When you describe psychological distress, what does that look like?
So, psychological distress is symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of PTSD. When you're constantly being reminded of acts that came before and you're really sort of on a equilibrium, trying to keep yourself physically and psychologically safe and not able to be thinking about how am I going to get out of this relationship.
Dr. Hughes, I want to make sure we all understand what you mean when you refer to psychological abuse. So very briefly and mm, very briefly and concisely, can you explain what that includes?
Objection.
Sustained. Let's move on.
Okay. You testified that sexual abuse can also cause a victim to remain in a relationship. How does that work?
Yes, because sexual abuse is so inherently damaging. It's a very private harm and is very much de- debilitates a person's psychological functioning. Sexual abuse is one of the highest types of traumatic stressors that we know can result in PTSD and is often met with a high degree of psychological distress. So if you're in a significant psychological distress in the relationship, you're walking around injured and harmed. It's important to understand that sexual abuse don't only mean objection.
I think the witness answered the question that was asked. Miss Steiner, do you have another question?
Yes. Why does why does that effect prevent a victim who's experienced sexual abuse from leaving the relationship?
Because they experience a tremendous amount of shame, humiliation, degradation. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to think about it in their own brains. They don't want to hear it come out of their own mouth. And they need significant help and resources in order to get out of that relationship. And if it's something you can't even talk about, these unspeakable acts, it prevents them from getting that help to get out of the relationship.
How, if at all, does emotional abuse cause a victim to remain in a relationship?
So simply, emotional abuse is when we belittle, demean, and put down our partner. What that does, the result is that our partners begin to feel like a low sense of self, a low sense of esteem, not feeling like they're worthy, feeling like a piece of crap. When you feel so low about yourself, you're moving into depressive symptoms. When we have depressive symptoms, we really don't have the motivations to do other things that maybe could be helpful for us, and we're still back to trying to prevent further physical violence or further psychological harm.
And again, can you bring us back to how that causes a victim to remain in a relationship?
Because if you can't talk about what's happening in your relationship, you can't get help. And who's going to talk about these very humiliating, degrading sexual things your partner does to you when that's not supposed to happen in an intimate relationship?
How does a victim's financial dependence on an abuser affect their ability to leave?
So that's very important. We look, we say we need psychological resources to leave. Objection.
Grounds.
Court's ruling.
It's overruled.
So you need the psychological resources to leave, but you also need the tangible resources to leave. What we see in a lot of these situations of domestic violence, there's a lot of financial control. So if your abuser controls the money for, housing, transportation, healthcare, childcare, and just general sort of expenses of living, how are you to leave if you don't have access to those tangible resources? And sometimes that financial control is about sabotaging the victim's ability to have independence, taking away her laptop, taking away objection.
Sustained. The jury should disregard the last sentence of the witness answer. Miss Steiner.
Same question, Dr. Hughes. How does this financial dependence, how can that prevent a victim from leaving a relationship?
So, if you don't have access to tangible resources, money, or an apartment, you are left with a feeling of where am I going to go? Am I stuck here? And that makes it very difficult to leave.
Dr. Hughes, you've now testified about a few different types of abuse. How do these types of abuse interact to prevent a victim from leaving a relationship?
So, they're all interacting. They're not all happening at once. They're not all happening simultaneously. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And that keeps the victim on a very unstable footing because they never know what's coming at them. So if you're unstable and you don't know how and when this person is going to abuse you, you're feeling more psychological consequences. You're feeling more trapped and you're unable to extricate yourself from the dynamic.
Do all of these types of abuse affect the victim's ability to leave the relationship?
Tierra.
Yes.
Do all of these types of abuse have to be present to prevent a victim from leaving a relationship?
No, they
I
don't.
heard that. It wasn't my turn. Why?
I think it's
I
StreamYard.
think you're going in and out, Tierra. Why not?
Because we look at the magnitude of what the behaviors are. Some of the behaviors are quite severe. So if you have more severe physical violence and severe sexual
Hello?
assault,
Hello?
we can hear you. You
Oh,
have
sorry.
several physical violence and several sexual assaults. That can be enough. And if we don't have emotional abuse or psychological abuse, but the more abusive behaviors we have, the greater degree of likelihood. And it's difficult for that individual to leave that relationship.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yep, we can hear you.
Dr. Hughes, how does the duration of these types of abuse affect the victim's ability to leave the relationship?
So it's very important. We know that more trauma is never a good thing. So, the more you're exposed to traumatic events and acts of violence and sexual violence, that deteriorates again the psychological functioning of the individual. So, we look at these measures, we look at the severity of the acts. How severe is what's happening? In our field, we say, what's the magnitude of the stressor? We look at that frequency. How often is it happening? And then we look at the duration over what period of time. When those things are high, we're seeing that, a victim who was, functioning to low capacity because you're so distressed and you're feeling more and more entrapped and homeless and helpless in this relationship.
Dr. Hughes, I want to turn to the second area of study that you mentioned. You testified that there can be periods of positivity and neutrality in a relationship in addition to the abuse. How can that affect the victim's ability to leave a relationship?
Sure. So, because of, as I said before, these relationships start with love and companionship and kindness. And the victim wants that. They want that back. So, when that is shown to the victim, that becomes very reinforcing. And when we see this often, it's called the honeymoon phase. That after that particular assaultive episode, that the abuser becomes contrite, becomes apologetic, gives promises to change, maybe gives. So now they're sort of showering their victims with all this love and care. That's what she or he only wanted. So now you have this very difficult situation where you're trying to live with the person who's abusing you, but I want that good person back. And that creates not only psychological confusion, but it also a psychological attachment to the individual, which sometimes we call as traum, traumatic or trauma bond.
What is a trauma bond, Dr. Hughes?
So a trauma bond is when somebody leaves the partner or somebody is attached to the partner. And somebody loves the partner in spite of the violence and the abuse. We know when we pair violences and abuse with times of good, it creates a very strong bond. We know that from just general psychological principles of intermittent reinforcement. Things that are intermittently reinforced have greater stability and behavior. They have a better ability to change behavior. So when you're getting unpredictable abuse and unpredictable love, that creates this intimate cycle. It's like a slot machine. You press the button. You press the button, you're going to lose most of the time. But when you hit it, that's the feeling that you want. And you keep going back because you want that good feeling. They want that good partner that they got, fell in love with, and that become an immense trauma bond. The other important part of trauma bond is, usually these acts are so private and they're so humiliating. The person not the only, but the person who the victim often turns to is the abuser because that's the person who knows what happened and who they can talk about it to. So if that's the person that you go to for that support, that's that need, that's that attachment, and that creates a very powerful bond. And it's very difficult with all the other abusive behaviors and extricate and leave an abusive relationship.
Dr. Hughes, what is the psychological effect of a trauma bond on a victim?
Well, first, it makes her unable to leave or makes them unable to leave. It makes them more attached to their partner, more willing to sort of go back and give it a try again. But it also has a sense of hopelessness and a sense of meaninglessness because you're feeling that sort of you as your individual person, you know, does not have the same agency as your partner.
Dr. Hughes, are you familiar with the term referred to as love bombing?
Yes.
What is that?
So, love bombing is a term that's used in a popular media. How we understand it in the literature is that honeymoon phase that I talked about. That's when a victim is trying to extricate themselves from the relationship or leave the relationship. The perpetrator, the abuser, showers them with love and affection and attention and, presents and gifts. And this is really a tactic to bring that trust and dependence back and get that victim back in the relationship.
Dr. Hughes, when a victim does attempt to leave an abusive relationship, Does that tend to happen immediately or over time?
No, it happens over time. We know from the research that it takes multiple attempts to leave an abusive relationship. There's reconciliation and then there's leaving again. And it can take multiple attempts. What
And what
mm, I'm sorry,
and
Sierra.
okay. And what obstacles are present for a victim at the time that they're attempting to leave the relationship?
So at that time, they are attempting to leave. That is usually met with intense fear on the victim. They are afraid of retaliation. They have been with a partner who has abused them, who has hurt them, who has shown them that they're willing to use serious forms of violence against them. And they're afraid of more retaliation and more danger. And that is unwarranted. We know from our very robust objection.
Let's move on.
Do victims ever return to abusive relationships after leaving?
And why do they return? Or yes, they do. There's this pattern of returning and reconciliation and trying to leave again.
And why do they return?
So they return for the love, they return for the companionship, they return for the good version of their partner that they still do love. And sometimes they return because the abuse is continuing. And if the abuse is continuing when they left and they're still being harassed and followed and surveilled and controlled, I might as well be back in the relationship because it's not working here. I'm not free.
Dr. Hughes, I want to move on to a new topic now. You testified for a while now about why victims remain in a relationship. I want to discuss with you how victims cope when they do stay in those relationships. So, first of all, can you describe generally what coping mechanisms are?
Sure. Coping mechanism, that's just a psychological term of how we deal with stressors in our lives. And coping strategies that we have examined are specific to what do individuals do when they are in an abusive relationship. We know that they do a lot of things, but we want to see what they do. When we look at that, we look at sort of formal coping mechanism, informal, and then personal strategies that they use.
I want to take those one at a time. So, you mentioned that there are formal coping strategies. What do you mean by that?
So formal strategies are using outside help. It may be going to the police, filing a protection order, getting medical help, going to a shelter. It's going to somebody who has the kind of authority to take a report. It can be, going to tell one ex officer in a university setting or going to HR professional in a workplace setting. It's somebody who has the authority to take the report. The problem is, it's the least likely and used strategy. Objection.
Let's move on. Next question.
You refer to informal types of coping. Can you describe what that means?
So, informal strategies are the ones we are trying to get the abuser to stop the abusive behavior by talking to family or friends, or trying to get their friends to talk to him or their family to talk to him, or trying to get them to go to church or go to counseling. And it's also talking to family and friends to try to get much needed support for the victim of how am I going to continue to deal with this mess.
Finally, what are types of personal coping mechanisms?
So the personal strategies are what the victim used within the relationship. It's not trying to get out of the relationship, but what do I do? I'm, these are trying to talk to your partner to try to stop the violence, talk about what's going on, trying to get counseling for help, trying to plead and negotiate for different kind of behaviors, trying to placate and give compliance to make your partner okay. Sometimes it's physically fighting back. It's all of these different strategies that the human is doing, that the victim is doing, but within the relationship, within the confines of the relationship.
You've described now these different types of coping mechanisms: formal, informal, personal. Which of these is most common?
The personal strategies are the most common that they're trying to use within the relationship, trying to work it out with your partner
Why is that the most common?
because of the trauma bond, because of the feeling entrapped that they can't leave, because of the psychological consequences that they're being burdened with. And you don't want to lose your partner. You still want to try to preserve the love of that partner. And you have this hope for change, which comes from the honeymoon phase and the cycle. So you're trying to do everything you can with that partner within that relationship to make this balance stop.
Within the personal coping mechanisms you mentioned quite a few. Does a victim use all of those personal coping mechanisms at the same time?
No, they don't. They have to be very attuned to their partner's moods and how they're feeling and what particular, anger, eruption, or abusive behavior they may use at certain times. So they use a lot of different strategies depending on the demands of what their partner brings into the room. I mean, it's important to know that as the abuse gets more severe, so do the coping strategies. So they don't use less, they use more. So they're doing a lot of things. It's just not stopping the violence.
I want to discuss a few of the personal coping mechanism strategies that you mentioned. Looking specifically at appeasing or placating an abuser. How does that work?
When they placate and appease our abuser, we were trying to do to soothe the abuser. We're trying to make an abusive episode not happen. We may be apologizing unnecessarily. We might be going along with the things that we don't want to do. And that's back to what I talked to you about before, the contingency. Once someone has demonstrated that they can use serious forms of violence against you, that contingency has set, that link is set. So the victim is really trying to do all of those things not to get hurt, not to get hit. And sometimes placating and compliance strategies are a good strategies to use.
What is the purpose for the victim of that coping strategy?
Objection.
Sustained.
Does this placating cannot appear in a sexual relationship?
It usually appears in all facets of relationship. And it's, you can say, if you say no to little things,
Objection.
objection.
It's overruled.
So if you can't say no to little things, it's hard to imagine when you're talking about something so sensitive and so personal that someone and a victim would actually have the agency to say no to something like that.
How, if at all, might that coping mechanism of placating and appeasing an abuser confuse a victim? Actually, taking a step back, how might it confuse others that are observing the relationship?
Objection.
Sustained.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor, are you familiar with the terms passive and active self defense?
Yes, I am.
Are those coping mechanisms?
Yes.
Can you describe what passive self defense is?
So passive self-defense ways that a victim might try to protect themselves when they are being assaulted. It may be blocking punches. It may be throwing a pillow or throwing at someone to get them to stop. It may be curling up in a ball on the floor. And it may be trying to do something at the least provoking as possible to get the violent episode to stop.
By contrast, what is active self defense?
So active self-defense are when victims are actively fighting back. They may hit back, they may punch back, they may push back, they may throw objects, they may yell back in a way to, you know, have some way of standing up for themselves, even though in many cases that usually results in more severe injury to themselves.
And you just said that it can result in more severe injury. What do you mean by that?
Because if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship of a man and a woman, just size and strength disparity between a man and a woman, a man can do more damage.
Objection.
Sustained.
Can a victim use both of these strategies, Dr. Hughes, meaning both passive and active self defense?
Yes. And like we said before, they're trying to mirror the strategies to what their abuser is bringing into the room. Victims get very hypervigilant to their abuser's moods. They're really trying to scan and track how they are presenting and how they are a certain day. And that's how they decide what strategies to use. Remember, I said they're using a lot of strategies, they just don't work?
Are there other coping strategies that victims use personally to cope with the consequences of the abuse?
Yes,
Could you describe what those might include?
sure. So, in addition to the strategies to working within the relationship and towards the abuser, they have to do things to deal with all that psychological and traumatic stress that I talked about. When you're in a relationship, one of the things that they use in avoidance strategy, they try to think about it, not feel it, not talk about it. They try to push it down and at forgetting. I'm not going to push the back of my mind. I'm going
Mimi,
to
I'm sorry.
compartmentalize.
I'm sorry, Mimi. Your thing keep going in and out. It's really bad.
I keep getting notifications. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you might need to turn the notification off. That's probably what is happening. Go ahead. I'm
Okay.
sorry, yo.
Sometimes there's a disassociation that happens in all these episodes. So it's all the ways sort of protecting themselves from the onslaught of the psychological consequences of the abuser while still being able to maintain the status quo and stay in relationships.
I want to talk about a few of those strategies with you now, Dr. Hughes. You mentioned avoidance. What is avoidance?
Avoidance is not dealing with something, right? Not trying to think, not trying to feel, not trying to talk about something. So it's about pushing under the rug and I'll deal with it later.
And what is minimization?
Minimization is a way of distancing yourself from the reality of what's going on. Sometimes victims do that to themselves by saying, maybe they didn't mean it, or maybe they were drunk, or maybe they were angry, had a stressful day at work. It's a kind of way of lessening the responsibility of what happened to them. And again, that's a way that they can try to find some kind of semblance of normalcy and stay in the relationship. And sometimes when they minimize the problem, and we know that's always that also increase the risk of more danger.
How does avoidance and minimization help a victim cope?
Well, it has short-term effectiveness. It's not a long-term strategy, but it also helps them get through the day. It helps them get from one episode to the next.
And you also mentioned disassociation, Dr. Hughes. What is that?
So, unlike other strategies, Disassociation is more of an involuntary coping mechanism. Brain does for us automatically. So what it is, it's a change in our conscious awareness. It's about zoning out, spacing out, looking at a ceiling, feeling that you're leaving your body. And it's a way really that your brain protects yourself from very serious psychological injury and physical injury. And with that disassociation, because you're not attending and you're not focusing, that often leads to impairments in the memory.
And why is that?
Because memory is dependent on our focusing and attention and applying significance to things. And when we're disassociating, we're having, technically, it's called an altercation in consciousness. We're having a change in our conscious awareness. We're not attending, so we're not encoding that information.
And we'll get back to memory in a few minutes, Dr. Hughes. Can substance abuse function as a coping mechanism?
Yes, it's a very common coping mechanism. Like I said before, we see a high degree of co-occurrence between trauma-based disorders and substance use disorders. And substances allow us to numb our pain. Most people know that. The problem with trauma survivors is that they do it to for a very trauma specific function, to get rid of the memories and the thoughts about what has happened to them in the past and the fear of what's happened to them in the future, to get rid of all the anxiety and fear based feelings that they're having because they're living in a state of fear. And then survivors and victims also use it as a preventive measure. We see a lot of survivors. If they've had a fight with their partners the day before because they get home, before they get home, I'm going to take drugs. I'm going to drink because I know what's going to happen when I get home. As I told you, they are very attuned to their partner's moods. They may take it sort of preventively to ward all physical and psychological pain that's going to come. And sometimes they do it to not feel and not to remember. Sometimes they know that they may interfere with their memory. They do not want to remember these things. The problem is substance use, the cycle.
Objection.
Let's go. Next question.
Dr. Hughes, can victims applying these various coping strategies that you've been testifying about, still express love and loyalty to their abuser?
Yes, and often they do. That's back to the trauma bond. Often they still have positive and loving feelings towards their abuser. Even after they've left for years, there's still a part of them that loves that initial person and they fell in love with.
Do these coping strategies, are they effective to stopping the abuse?
Objection.
That's sustained.
How does the use of these coping mechanisms consistently in a relationship impact the victim?
Objection.
It's sustained.
I want to turn to a new topic with you, Dr. Hughes, that of disclosure. How common is it for victims of abuse to disclose abuse at or near the time that it occurs?
So it's not common that the victims does that. Many victims will wait months, even years before telling about what happened to them. And the term that we use in the literature is called delayed disclosure because of that.
What are some of the reasons for disclosing or not disclosing abuse?
Some of the top reasons are fear of not being believed, fear of the negative consequences that are going to come from disclosure, fear that other people are going to look negatively on you. They're going to shame you, they're going to blame you. So don't say those questions like, oh, well, why didn't you just leave? They fear that they have sort of internal still that shame and that embarrassment. So they have to overcome that internalized shame and self blame in order to tell. Sometimes they have previous traumatic experiences. And if those, didn't go well in a disclosure, they might not do those again. somehow, why does this keep happening to me? I can't tell anyone about it. They fear the change in probably their economic situation. If they have those financial controls, they fear being publicly identified. And they fear that the change in the network, the change in the relationship, they fear that that can change in the network, the change the relationship. But usually, even when we leave the relationship, we have friends and family, and all of those people then, you know, are you going to go away? And they fear losing that as well.
How does the relationship between the victim and the abuser affect the disclosure process?
So, one of the robust feelings or one of the robust findings is that the closer the relationship to the perpetrator, the less likely you're going to disclose. So that means if you've had a stranger rape or assault, you're more likely to disclose that as opposed to somebody who's an acquaintance, somebody who's a partner.
How, if at all, does an abuser's perceived authority or stature affect a victim's disclosure?
Objection.
That's overruled.
So what it does is just amplify the power and control differential between the abuser and victims. It's very difficult for a victim to disclose in the best circumstances. And somebody can have cerebral power because they're the principal of a school and it can change many things. So if you're going against someone who has wealth and access to privilege, you're beginning to think, who is going to protect me? Who is going to believe me? How am I going to come out of this? They feel very safe or they don't feel very safe in that disclosure in those situations.
What factors contribute to when a victim does decide to disclose what their experience?
Usually it's when they're in a safe environment. Clearly, they're not being bombarded with any abuse anymore. That can be a factor. That could have left the relationship. That could be a factor. Could have had some psychological help. Having a way to put words to what they went through and to understand their experience of, how did I get here? How was I not able to say no? How was I abused for so long? And sometimes there are societal reasons. The way, things change in public or in society where you feel like you're not so alone, and it's okay. It's okay for me to talk about this now.
When a victim does come forward to report abuse, who are they initially most likely to disclose to?
They're most likely going to talk to a trusted friend or a confidant. It's usually a mother, a sister, a best friend, someone who they think really can support them through this process.
And when a victim does come forward initially with the report of abuse, what does the initial disclosure typically look like?
It's typically piecemeal. It's not a binary. I disclose, I didn't disclose. Usually it unfolds over time, especially if we have a long duration of a type of domestic violence relationship. And different bits come out with different people in different contexts. So we know that, and even I know that of evaluating hundreds of thousands of individuals, I'm not going to get all the information in one setting. That wouldn't be realistic, and we may not need that. Also, what inhibits the disclosures is that when they're talking about it, all of those trauma feelings are being evoked. All of that is coming up. So they're sitting there. So they're sitting there really trying to manage the internal traumatic stress and psychological distress each time they're talking about it. So they may sort of approach, talk a little, and then have a backup because it's just so painful.
How can past threats affect disclosure?
I mean, it can affect disclosure in a very serious way. If you've been threatened, if you tell something bad will happen to you, and this person has already demonstrated that they can use serious forms of physical violence or sexual assault against you, You believe them. So you may have to sort of wait to disclose to you have your other safety measures in place you have for yourself, whatever those may be.
Can you describe the type of language that victims typically use when they initially disclose?
So we talk about they're using minimizing language. They don't want to talk about the details of what happened. They talk around it. They don't want to label themselves as a victim. They don't want to label their abuser as abuser. They don't want to talk about graphic details. So that's sort of the piecemeal process that happens for individuals, where it's a little bit of distancing of all the psychological harm that they're feeling when they have to talk about, when they have to talk very detailed and specific about the abuse.
And Dr. Hughes, you just testified that victims, they don't want to label themselves as a victim. They don't want to label an abuser as an abuser. Why is that?
Really, because it's just too painful. It's really too painful to admit that back to somebody who loved me, did this to me, and they're still in self blame. Self blame takes a long time to go away, and shame takes a long time to go away. Like, why did it take me so long to get out of here? They don't understand it. Like the higher order of conceptualization, I'm providing here one today. That takes years of therapy for them to really understand the elements of control and entrapment that they're in.
Dr. Hughes, you said that victims can be reluctant to use more graphic, descriptive language. What type of language do they tend to use instead?
They use hedging language. Sometimes they won't say the name of the perpetrator. Sometimes they'll say, even patients in my practice, they'll say, you know, when that thing happened or the incident, they won't say the rape, they won't say the sexual assault. They'll use anything that can sort of distance themselves from the reality of the horrors that they went through.
Dr. Hughes, I want to turn to our final topic now, that of memory and the impact of trauma on memory. What does the literature and your clinical experience say about how victims remember these traumatic events?
Sure. So we know that trauma impacts memory. We know that on one hand, we can have a vivid, bright memory sort of burned into our brain, but at the same time, have lack of details and fragments for that same trauma. We know that trauma memories can be forgotten or not recalled and recalled at a later time. And we know that this cuts across trauma groups. This is not just domestic violence survivors. It's not just sexual assault survivors. We again see this in combat veterans, in child sex abuse victims, in our law enforcement. So whenever we have different trauma groups, we can see this type of interrupted memory.
And what is the impact of trauma on memory?
So in general, it's because the neurobiology neurobiology of stress, right? That narrows attention and that narrows attention in trauma. What we know is what victims remember the core gist of what happened. I was sexually assaulted. I was in a car accident. I was in the battlefield. People don't forget that. Then we go to those central details. Those are very pretty robust. People don't usually forget them. The problem is whatever the person assigns significance to at that moment. So that's not up to us. That's up to their brain. It may, if they're being assaulted, the smell of alcohol on the perpetrator's breath, it may be focusing on the chipping paint on the ceiling. Right. That's what they decide to assign significance for the real reason of keeping themselves safe. And those details also tend to robust and tend to be remembered. It's the peripheral details, which we say is everything else was not assigned significance. That doesn't get encoded because it doesn't have any value for the victim. It may have value. We might want to know those details, but it didn't get encoded because it didn't have significance for the victim.
I want to make sure we all understand these concepts. Can you describe what central details of a memory include?
So, central details are usually sensory things: a sight, a smell, a feeling, an emotion, and those are the types of details that get remembered.
And the peripheral details that you say are less likely to be remembered. What does those include?
Those are things that are just surrounding the other things that just don't get established significance. We sort of say they're in the bucket of everything else. That's not significant.
And what determines whether something is significant? Meaning whether something is a central detail or a peripheral detail.
That's absolutely unique to each individual, that their unique brains and their unique brains. Your brain is trying to function to keep you safe. We say your brain's working, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So we can't out here determine what's significant for you or what's significant for that person. That's a very unique thing for each person in the situation that they're in.
When you say it's a unique thing, is that a conscious or an unconscious process for people?
It's mostly unconscious. Certainly, the central detail of the person can say, make a deliberate attempt. I'm going to look at those drapes. And sometimes they just find that that's what they're doing. So there can be voluntariness in the central details.
Is that always the case?
No, it's not always the case. And sometimes victims don't know why I was focusing on them drapes.
And you referred earlier to memories being fragmented. What does that mean?
So fragmented just means that they're narrowing of the attention, that not all memories are getting in about the event that happened to you. So that is why it's not complete. And there's no evidence to suggest that because it's not complete. What we do know is reliable. So the fragmented memories can be just as reliable. They're just not as expansive and they're just not as complete. They're missing details.
Dr. Hughes, earlier you testified about the various types of coping mechanisms, including avoidance, disassociation. How can those types of coping mechanisms affect the memory of the victim?
So these are the things that the victim is doing after these assaultive episodes, right? They're trying to push it down, not to think about it, not to talk about it, and pushing it further in the recesses of their brain. This is a common thing that we see with trauma survivors. It's recognized as part of the PTSD diagnosis. What they do is they're deliberately trying to remember, and that can interfere with your recall of the information. Not the storage, which we did before, but that can interfere with the recall of the information.
And why are individuals who are employing or using disassociation or other coping mechanisms trying not to remember?
Right. They're trying not to remember because it's too painful to remember. The only difference, you should disassociation that's involuntary. So these other things I just talked about, the directing forgetting, the compartmentalization, that's voluntary. The dissociation is not voluntary. That's when your brain is sort of taking you someplace else to not feel and not to remember. That's the difference between those two.
And specifically, then, for disassociation, how can that coping strategy affect memory?
Because if you're not attending and you're not focusing, it's not getting encoded.
You say encoded. Are you referring to being remembered?
Yes, a memory has to be encoded for us to remember it. Yes.
How does the frequency of abuse affect the victim's ability to recall particular events of abuse?
So we know that when we have chronic situations, again, like domestic violence, like our combat veterans, not everything is going to get in. Events are going to blend together. And that's because of, again, that high stress neurobiology of repeated traumatic events and also just the general principles of memory of repeated events. We know that it could remember each time you had a slice of pizza at your favorite pizza place. I can't, you can't remember every single time you walked in this courtroom and the precise details of what happened at every time. The repeated events that we do commonly are not all going to get recalled. Unfortunately, in situations of domestic violence, there are these repeated events. There is a routine of all this abuse happening. So these abusive episodes are blending together.
When you say that memories are blending together, what does that look like?
It looks like someone can say, I know I got punched a bunch of times, but I can't recall or I can't tell you when that was. I know I was kicked and I was in a ball in the closet. I know that happened a couple times, but I can't tell you when. I can't place it in a timeline. And sometimes it's those external markers where individuals are able to place it in a timeline of this happened on my birthday or this happened on the beach vacation where they have a marker and they can't go. Yeah, I remember that happened there. But all of the other similar types of behaviors that have been happening to them, they are not usually able to bring out each and every one.
And are memories of an abusive event that's connected to a marker, are they more likely to be remembered?
Yes, they are.
And can you just describe what a marker might be?
That's like I said, like a birthday or anniversary, or it was a snowstorm, right? There's something that sort of connects the memory to something else, which makes it much more likely to be recalled.
You testified a moment ago, Dr. Hughes, that when abuse is very frequent, a victim tends to not recall each instance of abuse. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that prevent a victim from knowing that they were abused or recalling that they were abused?
No, because like we just said, they don't lose the core gist of what happened to them, that they're being abused or that they're being sexually assaulted. That is pretty solid. That does not go away.
Can trauma memories be recalled over time?
Yes, they do. All memories can be recalled. That's sort of the hallmark of trauma memories in post traumatic stress disorder. That's the trauma doesn't stay in the mind forever. Eventually, it comes up into the forefront, and the person is left in having to deal with it. That's usually met with tremendous amount of psychological distress and being sort of bombarded with images and thoughts of traumatic experiences and having tremendous amounts of anxiety, hypervigilance, and sadness and all types of disequilibrium when that memory comes back.
You used a couple of words that I may not understand. So hypervigilance and disequilibrium. Can you just briefly explain what those terms mean?
Sometimes when the memory comes back, we feel as though it's happening now. So that hypervigilance, which means you're scanning for danger, you're being on alert, even though you're out of this relationship, the brain is not sure you are. So it's bringing those same characteristics back. And you're usually hypervigilant and afraid and watching things, even though you're not in that situation anymore.
When victims do recall these difficult events, how do they tend to describe them?
I mean, a lot of times they describe them frankly. Like, I think I'm going crazy. That's a lot of times how people enter ERs or enter into the VA or enter into my office. They don't usually understand how they can't put these memories back in the box like they were, a couple years ago or a couple days ago. Once you sort of open that crack, they're out there, and individuals have to deal with them. Individuals have to deal with and use them. But it's very distressing for people, very upsetting, and they have a lot of psychological difficulty with that process.
How can trauma memories be cued or triggered?
So that's our recall, our retrieval of memories, and they're cued by context and cues. Sometimes the context elements are a place for a feeling, and sometimes back for our a sight, a sound, and sometimes it's a combination of those that bring a memory back up into the forefront. And that's also, happens to trauma memory. But also, general principle of memory, again, you go home for Thanksgiving and you're at a family table with your siblings. And the same dynamics, someone laughs in a certain way or someone yells in a certain way, that's likely is going to trigger a memory from before. That's just how memory retrieval and recalls work. That's something that happens with victims as well. They smell the smell of alcohol. They may see someone dressed in a certain way, someone walk in a certain way, and the brain will register that as something of danger and open up those memories.
And when in time after the instance of abuse, can memories be triggered or cued in the way you're describing?
I mean, they can be triggered by any time or at any time. Sometimes they trigger all the time since the episodes have happened and ended at sometimes when what what we call later recall. We know that can happen as because of all those defenses where someone's trying to put them in the back of their head that they can later recall these memories. We know this again in the PTSD diagnostic criteria. We have it. It's called delayed expression of PTSD. And that is the manual that we've used in the psychological and psychiatric communities for decades now. There's no evidence either, especially we know this with our war victims, our combat veterans, as well as our assault victims, that later retrieved memory is any less accurate than if someone had it. They might not have all the details because it's a later retrieve, but there's no evidence that it's less accurate.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Steiner. Cross examination.
Very quick sidebar.
She's switching.
We know.
She
Are we?
wants to be Bach.
Oh, okay.
Who's switching?
You, I thought you wanted to
Am
be
I
Bach,
Bob? Okay, yeah, I can be Bob.
and then Mimi is gonna be the same person she is already.
Oh, y'all set me
And
up.
Tiara, you the judge.
Okay.
Y'all set me up.
You want to switch me, or you want to do that part?
Yeah, we can switch.
Okay.
Um, thank you,
Yeah.
Ms. Steiner. Cross examination.
Very quick sidebar.
Okay. Yes, Your Honor. The defense moves to strike the direct testimony as hold on, as violative of both Rules 702 and 403 for many of the reasons in our motion in limine. In particular, the testimony on coping strategies and why people don't leave relationships essentially was a backdoor way of getting in much of the information in the coercive control discussion that Your Honor included. We tried to object as best as we could, but she used the word control multiple times. She referred to many of the supposed control strategies in the disclosure in the guise of the testimony about the coping strategies. In addition, even the testimony about delayed memory, I think, illustrates some of the points we made previously about how it's junk science. It was virtually any memory can be explained. Her
Well,
testimony.
I, are you reading Bach?
No, I'm reading Miss Shapiro.
Oh,
Who- Ask
Ain't
a
that's
question.
my and that's
Who is this doctor right now? Because I'm
I'm
confused. Who
I'm the
playing?
doctor. You want I thought you
Okay.
want me to be doctor, right? But ain't Miss Shapiro, no, Miss Shapiro is a defense attorney.
She is a defense attorney.
I'm sorry, Mimi.
Okay. Where we at, baby?
Line 14
this
Um,
is all okay. I'm so confused now.
So Miss
Miss
Shapiro, Miss
is a
Shapiro,
defense attorney.
she's gonna no, she's actually,
A defense attorney. She's on the defense
yes,
side.
yes, she
we
is.
got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
W- With respect to the memory, if I could just respond to that, my point is she strayed from the disclosure. It's that the substance of the testimony was so all over the map. As we have argued earlier, that this sort of amounts to junk science because she's basically almost whatever the particular circumstances of the alleged victims recall will be explained by testimony. That was my point, just to be clear. Tiara.
Miss Stein, Miss Steiner, right?
Okay, I'll be the judge because this is gonna be, yeah. Miss Steiner.
Your Honor. I mean, we used to the. Your Honor, I think the defense very robustly objected. Your Honor was policing the issues very carefully. I think we're well within the scope of Your Honor's order and the notice. Specifically, with respect to coping strategies, the notice was specifically very broad. It says that Dr. Hughes will speak about a broad range of defense mechanisms and coping strategies. And as she did, she explained there are a multitude of coping strategies that are necessary that can be utilized at different points in time depending on what the victim is encountering. Similarly with memory, I'm not quite sure what the objection is here. I think she hewed very closely to the notice and talking about the effects of PTSD, how trauma affects memory, and how memory can subsequently be recalled through cues and triggers.
With respect to memory, if I could just respond to that, my point is she strayed the disclosure. It's that the substance of the testimony was all over the map. As we had argued earlier, that this sort of amounts of junk science because she's basically almost whatever the particular circumstances of an alleged victim recall would be explained by the testimony. That was my point, just to be clear.
Understood. As to the first basis for the application involving the attempt to get to the back door or on coercive control, I think that's based on Mr. Bach's objections and the constant sustaining of objections and requesting Ms. Steiner to move forward. That we are that we avoided all those issues to the extent that any issue arose. As to the issue concerning the basis under Rule 702 for testimony that was offered, I think I need to see the cross-examination because as it was presented, there was an initial specification, witnesses qualifications, and the indication that she was basing her opinions on both literature and then her clinical practice. When she was testifying, she offered testimony. Sometimes she did indicate that she was basing her testimony on literature or her clinical practice. I agree sometimes she just offered testimony without stating the basis. I think that under the preponderance standard, Rule 702, she can infer that's based on her clinical experience or literature. But I think some of these issues are going to be teased out in her cross-examination. So I'll reserve on application for now.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. So are you Mr. Who's Mr. Bach?
Who
May I
I can be Mr. Bach.
may I
Who's
proceed,
who's
Your Honor? We switch roles in the
You
middle,
may
now it's confusing
proceed.
everybody.
And just so we have a sense of the schedule, let's go for about 15 minutes and then we'll take a break for lunch.
Sure. Dr. Hughes,
Cross-examination by the
you
court.
do you want to do it or what,
Go
JC?
ahead, Mimi.
No, I thought you were doing it. That's fine. I'll be the
Dr.
judge.
Hughes, you've been a psychologist for 30 years, correct?
I believe so. I think I was licensed in 1997.
And you have a private independent practice.
Correct.
So people come to you for counseling and therapy.
Correct. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay.
And you see them at an office.
Yes, I do.
You sit down with them face to face.
Yes, I do.
I think you're going out. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear
And
you. I can't hear. I don't think I can hear
For Mimi?
Mimi.
Okay.
and you sit down with them face to face
Yes, I do.
and you talk with them, right?
Yes, I do.
And you talk with them at length, right?
Yes.
And when the people that came to meet with you, you listen very carefully to what they have to say, right?
Yes.
And when the people come to you, when people come to meet with you, you listen very carefully to what they have to say, right?
Yes.
And when the people that come to you meet with you, you listen very carefully to what they have to say, right?
Yes.
And you pay attention to detail
Yes.
and not just to what they're telling you about their lives, but you observe the manner in which they express themselves, correct?
Yes.
In other words, you're trained as a psychologist to look at someone's cognitive style.
Among other things. Yes.
That way, their emotional effect registers, correct?
Yes.
They can be red scent and shy, right?
Yes.
They can be verbose and talk active, correct?
Yes.
And when you do your work, you pay attention to those types of details, correct?
Yes.
And you pay attention to the different things they tell you about their lives, correct?
Yes.
And you are trained to do that because any detail they convey to you can be important, correct?
I don't know if I would say any detail can be important. You're trying to ascertain which facts are and which facts aren't.
Well, not every detail is important, but you're listening carefully because a detail could be important, correct? You watch.
Sure.
And people are complicated.
Yes, we are.
You laugh, but people don't fit into those boxes. Isn't that fair?
Well, we have general categories of how we understand people, general categories of psychiatric disorders that we do know, present in a certain way.
Understood. But even with those categories, when someone comes to you for analysis or diagnosis, you have those categories in mind, but you listen to that particular individual, to what that particular individual has to say, correct?
Yeah, I'm certainly not divorced from my education, training, and experience about certain other areas of study when I'm doing that, of course.
Your education and experience taught you how to listen carefully to individuals, correct?
Correct.
You can't diagnose someone without hearing what they have to say, correct?
Correct.
In your practice, you typically would treat someone without sitting down with them. Spend time with them and listening very, very carefully to what they're telling you and the manner in which they're conveying it, correct?
Correct.
When someone comes to you and you have your education, you have your background, you have your categories, but when someone comes to you, you do, I think you said on direct, a comprehensive evaluation to understand that what you're being presented, to understand what you're being presented with, correct?
I do.
JC, you following?
Yeah, I am.
Take over. I got something important.
Okay, no problem. Comprehensive evaluation means it's comprehensive. You look at a lot of things, correct?
Correct.
At each person present it's his or her own way when they come to you, right?
Correct.
And you have to hear what each person has to say, correct?
Sure.
And right now we are just talking about your private practice, right?
Correct.
And I think you used the words before. You used the words clinical practice, right?
Yes.
In other words, your office is kind of like a clinic in which you see and treat people, correct?
It's not a clinic. It's a private office where I treat people in psychotherapy
You said, but you referred to that as your clinical practice, right?
because I'm conducting clinical work.
I got it. And that's one kind of work that you conduct.
Yes.
We just talked about that. There's another kind of work that you said you conducted, and that's called forensic work, correct?
Correct.
And that's something that you do as well, correct?
That's correct.
And that's different from your clinical practice.
That's correct.
Forensic work is when you're evaluating somebody in the context of a legal proceeding, correct?
Correct.
That's where you're evaluating someone and you're listening to them carefully, not just because you want to treat them. You're listening to them carefully because courts and judges and lawyers might be reviewing what you have to say about that person, correct?
That's not what why I'm listening intently. I'm listening intently to really understand the person in front of me and what ails them and what the difficulties are.
But you know that whatever conclusions you may or may not draw, whatever analysis you may conclude, that may be viewed by the courts and lawyers, correct?
Of course.
And the forensic context, correct?
Yes.
So there, you pay attention to detail, correct?
I pay attention to detail because I want to do a comprehensive evaluation and I know that the work is going to be looked at by other people.
When you do forensic work, as opposed to seeing a patient, say once or twice a week in your clinical practice, you take your investigation of the facts to the next level, correct?
You have to explain what you mean.
Sure. When you do forensic work, you don't just talk to someone who comes to see you for your therapy, correct?
Correct?
You go to other sources for information, correct?
Correct?
You want as many sources of information, as many data points as you can reasonably get a hold of, correct?
Depending on the relevance of that data, sure.
Of course. If something is relevant, you don't care about it, right?
Correct.
But if something is relevant, I apologize. If something is irrelevant, you don't care about it, correct?
And correct?
But if something is relevant, you care about it, right?
Correct?
And even if it contradicts what that person is telling you, you really want to know about that, correct?
Yes.
And so, what you do in a forensic setting, and a bunch of your work is forensic, correct?
Correct.
What you do in a forensic work, you listen to what that person has to say, and then you go look at other things to see how that pans out, correct?
I think you're making it a little more simplistic. I just don't listen. I'm conducting a clinical interview. a semi-instructed clinical interview, and administer in psychological tests. So it's not like I'm listening like I would be listening with a psychotherapy patient. It's a different methodology.
I don't disagree with what you said. I want to explore that a little more so everyone understands where we are. You understand that when you're in a forensic setting, the person that you're evaluating may have certain motivations because of the legal proceedings that you wouldn't necessarily find in your ordinary clinical practice.
Correct.
And you approach forensic evaluation with that possibility that someone might have certain motivations in mind, correct?
Correct.
And so when someone tells you something and offers it for a fact in forensic work, you approach that with some degree of healthy skepticism, correct?
Correct.
And you do some cross checking, correct?
Correct.
You do a deeper dive than you do in your ordinary clinical practice, correct?
Correct.
And you look at all kinds of sources of information when you do forensic work for courts and lawyers, correct?
Correct. As we said, determine on their relevance.
The ones that are irrelevant, you ignore, okay? And the ones that are relevant, you try to look at, correct?
Yes.
Sometimes you don't know if they are relevant until you look at them, right?
Correct.
Among the things that you tend to look at when you do legal related work, you look at witness reports, correct?
Correct.
Police reports, correct?
Correct.
If someone has medical records or prior psychiatric or therapy records, you hope you could see those as well, right?
Yes.
You would look at their educational background, correct?
Yes.
You mentioned veterans. If you were treating someone in the military and you would then look at their military background.
Yes.
So you would do that. You would do what you called your structured interview of that person. But then you would also look at documents and records and all of the other information, correct?
That's correct.
Again, that's because you've been trained to pay attention to detail, correct?
Trained to do a comprehensive forensic assessment. Yes.
And that means looking at a lot of pieces of information, correct?
Correct.
It means looking at a lot of pieces of evidence, correct?
Correct.
And you mentioned a moment ago, and I want to come back to this, something that you referred to as a psychological testing, correct?
Yes.
When we are talking about psychological testing, let's be clear. There are certain standardized tests that you are this discipline of psychology has developed over time, correct?
Correct.
And these tests are developed by experts in the field, correct?
To make sure they have reliability and validity. Yes.
Wh-
Oh, correct.
And they go through a validation process to make sure that they have decent diagnostic value, correct?
To make sure they have reliability and validity. Yes.
Perfect. And those tests give you an opportunity to look at something that's reliable, kind of an objective measure, instead of just relying on what you're hearing from that person that you're sitting across from when you do your semi-structured interview, correct?
Correct.
Those tests can be very important data points in your comprehensive evaluation, correct?
Correct.
And again, you've had years of training to enable you to do the kind of complex analytical work that this kind of psychological investigation typically requires, right?
Correct.
You've administered tests such as you've administered something called a personality assessment inventory, correct?
Correct.
You've administered a TSI test. What does that stand for?
The trauma symptom inventory.
And these are, in your forensic practice, these are tests that you are quite familiar with, correct?
Correct.
And these are tests that you rely on, correct?
Correct.
And you rely on them because you're not relying just solely on your own interaction with the individual, correct?
Correct. But it's a way of analyzing and looking at a whole host of symptoms that individuals may have.
Even with all your training, and it's impressive training, and it is an impressive training and background, even with all the training, you rely on these tests developed by other people to help guide your analysis, correct?
I rely on multiple methods. What we say, a forensic evaluation is a multi method, multi hypothesis driven model. So I'm relying on all of these models, methods to arrive at my conclusion.
Because these things are complicated, right?
I agree.
You can't find a sentence in the literature that says this is how somebody is. You have to do all these multi data point evaluations to get a sense of that, correct?
To get a sense of that individual, yes.
And when you do the testing and when you talk to the individual, you're familiar with a concept. I don't think this was mentioned by the prosecutor, but you're familiar with a concept called malingering, right?
I am.
And malingering is a fancy way of saying that someone might be exaggerating or distorting the facts because of the circumstances in which they find themselves, correct?
That's not a correct definition.
Why don't you give us a correct definition?
But lingering is just the fabricating of emotional or psychological symptoms. It's not related to the facts of their case.
You talked about a different emotional response that people have of trauma, or you talked about a trauma bond. You talked about a number of things, but people can fabricate emotional responses, correct?
They can.
And notwithstanding the patterns that you talked about in the literature, these tests help you determine what's going on with a particular individual that you are looking at in any given time, correct?
You wouldn't take the test alone. You're looking for the confluence of the data points, the clinical interview, the testing, the external data, and you're looking how it all holds together to render an opinion.
And you have to look at everything, right? You have to look at all those different sources, the ones that are relevant. You have to look at them and you have to see how they all hold together, correct?
Correct.
And that's part of doing a detailed fact intensive analysis, correct?
Correct.
You're familiar with something called, let me withdraw that and say a number of the tests that you use have something called a built in validity index, correct?
Validity scales. Yes.
Validity scales. And the validity scale is because there is some people, even on in a forensic setting, even when someone like you is administering the test, there are some people who try to fool the test, right?
Yes.
And the validity, what did you say it was?
Validity scales.
Validity scale is there to help you, Dr. Hughes, decide whether the person you're evaluating is trying to fool the test or not, correct?
The validity scales are really to look at the response style of the individual. The two tests that you mentioned also are used clinically, and we use them in the clinical practice as well. So it does look at things like exaggeration, but it also look at things minimization and defensiveness and not wanting to report symptoms. So we see that as well.
Minimization is sometimes understated. Some things that you may have done or that you're ashamed of, correct?
Not that necessarily you're ashamed of, but that you don't want to address, like I talked about before. So sometimes we see individuals who are minimizing their distress.
Dr.
Dr. Hughes, Dr. Hughes, if you're asked a yes or no question, give a yes or no answer, and then we will have a redirect after cross. Okay, a couple more questions, and then we are going to take our lunch break.
Sure.
Or you can stop now.
Why don't we just stop now because I don't have a good cliffhanger and we will take it up and we can take it up after lunch.
Fair enough. Thank you, members of the jury. Enjoy your lunch. Please do not speak with each other about the case during lunch. We will be back at 12:45. All rise. Dr. Hughes, we will see you back here at 12:45. You are not to have any discussions with the government during the break. Thank you. Thank you very much. Everyone else, please be seated. Anything from the government before we take our lunch break? Just to inquire when Your Honor would like to have Mr. Kaplan come into invoke, let's do that right now. I will ask the agent to bring Mr. Kaplan in then. Your Honor, do you need a hard copy of the order or do you have it? Do you have an extra hard copy? I do, Your Honor. I'll bring it up. I'll ask the courtroom deputy to swear the witness in. George Kaplan, called as a witness by the government, having been duly sworn, testified as follows. Are we going on?
I guess so.
Okay, well,
Who's
I'm
the
Miss
you?
Comey. I'm
You
Miss
don't,
Comey. Good afternoon, Mr. Kaplan. Did you receive a subpoena requiring you to testify at this trial?
yes,
Do you have an attorney who represents you in connection with this matter?
yes,
And based on your discussions with your attorney, do you intend to invoke your constitutional right not to testify and not to answer any and all questions put to you at this trial on the grounds of potential self incrimination?
I do.
Do you understand that if the court enters an order granting you immunity, that you will be required to answer any and all questions truthfully here today?
Yes,
Do you understand that the order will not protect you from prosecution for perjury if you make a false statement here today?
yes,
Your Honor, I will ask, on the basis of the witness's answer to my questions, that you enter the proposed order that we have submitted. Let me ask the witness, have you seen a copy of this order?
I have not.
Miss Comey, is there any reason that the witness needs to review the order or the application materials? I don't believe so, Your Honor, but I have a copy available if he or his attorney would like to review them. Has his attorney reviewed it? He has not, but I can hand him a copy right now. Why don't we give it over to the witness's attorney, give him a second to review it, and I'll ask the attorney if there are any further issues to address before the court signs the order. Just give it one moment. The attorney has informed me, Your Honor, that he has reviewed the order and that he is satisfied that there are no issues with it. What is the attorney's name? Michael Becker, Your Honor. Based on the questions asked and the answers given, the court will execute the order regarding immunity and make it part of the record. Is there anything further, Miss Comey? No, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaplan. We will see you back here this afternoon. We are adjourned until 12:45. Your Honor, can I raise one issue before the lunch break? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You got it all, girl.
I am I apologize, especially to Miss Westmoreland. I just wanted to flag for the court that the government will seek to admit a certain exhibit is Government Exhibit 629-A after Mr. Kaplan's testimony. The government has not yet conferred with the defense, but we will do so over the lunch break. I expect that there could be argument on this particular exhibit before its admission.
Let's see if it is something that we can address briefly when we get back from lunch break, just so we don't have to have a break while the jury is out here.
Of course, Your Honor.
Very good. We are adjourned. Okay, so this is coming back at 12:50. Miss Slavic, do we have any issues to address it regarding the exhibit?
Your Honor, I haven't had the opportunity to confer with the defense. I'm looking at Miss Gregos. Miss
I understand.
Garagos. I'm sorry. Your
I
Honor.
understand that the defense will object to the exhibit admission.
Go ahead.
They will. Shall we take a look at them, or do I need some of the context through Mr. Kaplan's testimony?
No, I think we could take a look now. Like I said, the government will plan to admit this after Mr. Kaplan's testimony. So we can take it up now.
Let's take it up right now.
Great.
Sorry, do I have the exhibit?
I sent the exhibit to Your Honor's chambers. It can be brought up on the screen as well.
No, I have it.
You got it?
I apologize for that. I didn't see the email. I'm looking at this. I see it's redacted.
Yes. It's redacted for 412 issues, Your Honor.
What is the nature of the objection?
That's me.
You
That's
want me to do it, or you?
Yes, ma'am. No, you can do it.
Okay. The objection is that it is hearsay, clearly being offered towards truth from someone who is not going to be testifying at this trial. It's prior out of court statements. It's detailed. It's the government's beliefs that it's damaging. There is no endorsement of the statement by Mr. Combs, and so I have two bases for objection. First is inadmissibility hearsay. Explain how it's hearsay over a statement of a party opponent or statement of a party opponent as to Mr. Combs, and then under 802D 2D as to Uncle Paulie. First, the statement, thanks. I feel you from Mr. Combs, I think is ambiguous. He is not saying I agree. He could be saying thanks for the advice. Thanks. The statement is thanks. I feel you. I don't think without anything more, there is nothing about the statement that's an endorsement. He is not verifying. Maybe
Maybe
I'm
I'm
missing. I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
maybe I'm missing something. Is that a 403 objection?
That's a hearsay objection. The order I would like to go is why it's hearsay without an exception, and then I'll go to 403. The two reasons why it's hearsay is because it's a statement by another person. It's a prior out of court statement being offered for the truth of assertions in the statement.
Let's start. To the extent that Mr. Combs made any statements, why would it not fit under 801D 2A, which covers statements made by the party?
The only statement Mr. Combs makes is thanks. I feel you.
Right. And you would not have a hearsay objection to that statement.
Thanks. I feel you is absolutely admissible as a statement of a party.
Great.
It's the blue statements I object to
As to the blue statements, why would those not be admissible under 801D 2D?
because these are not statements that are, can we do this? We just got this.
Would you rather take this up after Dr. Hughes is off the stand?
Let me take a look at this compared to the cases we have been talking about, and I can be more helpful to the court.
That's fine. Thank you, Miss Slavic, for sending the exhibit. Now I have seen it. We will pick it up after Dr. Hughes. Thank you, Your Honor.
Miss Steiner, can we get Dr. Hughes back?
Yes.
Welcome back, Dr. Hughes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Dr. Hughes, you understand that you're still under oath?
Correct. Thank you.
Mr. Bach, you may proceed. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Hughes, before the break, we were discussing your clinical practice, correct?
Yes.
Then we got to your forensic practice, correct?
Yes.
We talked about how in both of those practices, you listen carefully to the individual pieces of information that you are gathering over time, correct?
Yes.
And we were talking about the test just before the break, correct?
Yes.
And you rely on those tests because when you're doing forensic work, you want to get as much information, as much data points as you can, correct?
Yes.
In fact, when you do forensic work in a case specific way, that the last thing that you want to do is to be blind to the facts, correct?
When I'm conducting the evaluations, sure.
You want to live in those facts, correct?
I don't know if I want to live in them, but I certainly review everything mm, copiously as I can.
You agree that psychologists cannot give an opinion on the psychological characteristics of an individual when the psychologist has not assessed that person, correct?
I mean, there is some controversy in the field about that. In our ethical codes, some people we say can't diagnose, but sometimes as a forensic pathologist, psychologic, oh my goodness,
Right.
psychologist, if that individual is made unavailable, we can make some conclusions based on a record review.
Dr. Hughes, do you remember testifying in June 2019 across the Brooklyn Bridge in the Eastern District of New York in another matter?
Not particularly, but yes, I know I testified.
Let me ask you if you were asked this question and gave this answer.
Sure.
Question: you agree that a psychologist such as yourself cannot give an opinion on the psychological characteristics of an individual when he or she has not assessed that person?
That's also you.
A, that's generally a fair statement. Were you asked that question And did you give that answer?
I don't have the transcript. I'm assuming that you have it, and I did say that.
I'm happy to share it with you.
I think the answer is the same as what I'm telling you.
I think you testified on direct examination that you participate in an organization known as the American Psychological Association. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you would agree that the American Psychological Association states, as a matter of policy, that a psychologist should only render an opinion of an individual after an examination of the individual adequate to support the statement or conclusion, correct?
And what are you reading from?
Let's let Dr. Hughes see this. Can you put up 3752-3, page 10?
Your Honor, can we confirm that is only for the parties and the witness?
Only for the parties and the witness. Dr. Hughes, anytime I mention something that draws on your memory and you don't remember it, let me know and I'll show it to you as best as I can. Do we have 3752-3 at page 10 in front of the witness? Can I get it on my screen? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yeah. I don't know what your question was. Let's
Let's take
take.
the
Go ahead. Go
let's
ahead.
take the document down and you can ask the question. You would agree that the American Psychological Association, let's take the document down and then you can ask the question. Sure. Now proceed. Thank you. Dr. Hughes, you would agree that the American Psychological Association, which you are part of, states that a psychologist should only render an opinion of an individual after an examination of the individual adequate to support the statement of conclusion.
I agree with that. There are other guidelines, but that is part of one that I agree with.
In this case, let's we talked about your clinical practice. We talked about your forensic practice. Now let's talk about your work in this case. In this case, you did not do a comprehensive forensic evaluation, correct?
I was not asked to do that. I was asked to give general testimony to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Understood. When you say general testimony, that means you did not meet a single witness, correct?
That's correct.
You did not review a single witness statement.
That's correct.
This is different from your forensic practice. It's different from your clinical practice where you listen carefully to details, correct?
It's a different role that I do as a forensic psychologist. Yes.
You know there is a court reporter here who takes down what people say during the trial every day, correct?
Yes.
You didn't review your transcripts from your prior days of this trial, correct?
I did not.
You didn't review any police reports.
I did not.
You didn't review any medical or psychological records.
I did not.
You didn't cross check or do anything like that with family members or friends.
I did not.
To cut to the chase, you have not gathered detailed information about the specific facts of this case, correct?
Because I'm not rendering in opinions about a specific individual.
Let's be clear about that. Point one is you have not done any work to gather detailed information about the specific facts of this case, correct?
Correct. That is not my role.
And you have not gathered detailed information about any of the women who testified in this case, correct?
Correct.
Have you heard there is someone named Cassie?
I have seen the headline. I don't know who that is other than that.
But you don't know what she said on the witness stand?
I do not.
You don't know what her demeanor was, how she presented?
I do not.
You don't know what she said in her text to Mr. Combs?
I do not.
You don't know anything about the psychological history of background or her background, correct?
That's correct.
You don't know anything about her drug use, right?
That's correct.
And that's because you're just here. Let's just be clear about this. You're just here providing general background information, correct?
Right. It's called subject matter testimony on my area of expertise. That's correct.
You can call it that, or you can call it general background information, correct?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained. You're not providing any opinion on any particular fact in this case, correct?
That's correct.
And you understand that while you're here giving subject matter or general background evidence, that while you're doing that, you understand from all of your experience that the jury's job is to consider the specific facts and the evidence in this case.
Objection.
Sustained. Now, I want to make sure you and I agree on terms. I called it general background testimony, but what was your preferred term?
General subject matter testimony.
You have given more or less than the same general subject matter testimony that you have given in this court. You have given in open courts in other cases, correct?
Because this is my area of expertise.
So the answer is yes, correct.
Yes, that's correct.
So in other courtrooms, you have come in and you have taken the witness stand and you have talked about memory, right?
Yes.
Talked about coping, correct?
Yes.
Talked about reporting, correct?
Correct.
You have said many of the same things you have told us about here today, correct?
Probably.
And you have been hired by a number of different prosecutor offices to do that, correct?
Correct.
You have done it for this prosecutor's office before, correct?
Correct.
We just discussed how you have done it across the river in Brooklyn. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You have done it in the state cases brought by state ADAs and a number of domestic violence cases, correct?
That's correct.
You have given the same subject matter or general background testimony, even though in all of those cases, none of them involved the same people, correct?
Correct.
None of them involved the same evidence, right?
Correct.
In other words, it's not key to the particular facts of an issue in the case, correct?
I think it's key to the jury understanding the issues that they are trying to understand.
But the jury is here to understand the evidence in the case, correct?
Yes.
Because you have given this general testimony a number of times now. Over how many years have you been given this same general testimony?
I don't know if I'm giving the same general testimony, but I was first qualified in 1999 in Kings County.
You're talking about your understanding of the literature, right?
Correct.
And you're talking about those lessons that you have learned from your own experience, correct?
Correct.
By the way, that experience, the experience that you have had in your own private practice, that's confidential, correct?
About the individual patients, of course.
And you haven't published any data related to your patients?
No, I have not.
So you haven't shared any information that the dates of your experience with the prosecutors, right?
Of my patients?
Right.
No,
You haven't shared them with the judge?
of course not.
You certainly haven't shared them with me, right?
No,
When you say something, you know something from your experience. There is no way that I can do any kind of forensic cross check or any kind of data point to see whether what you're saying, someone might interpret what your patients have said to you is slightly different in slightly different ways, correct?
possibly.
And given this summary of this literature a number of times, there is no fact, there is no individual piece of data from this case that I can present to you that would lead you to say, oh, you know what? All this literature is different than I thought, right?
Correct.
I mean, I could sit here and throw facts at you all day, but you are just here to say what your understanding of the literature is, correct?
And the totality of my knowledge, education, training, and experience as well.
Right. I could tell you about Cassie. I could tell you about the evidence in this case. And you say, well, I know my experience, correct?
That's correct.
What I'm trying, I may be already there, but you're here to talk about what you say is your experience and what you say the literature can be distilled as saying. But you are not here to say what any particular witness state of mind is, correct?
That's correct.
By the way, you talked about coping and you said that there was informal coping and formal coping, correct?
Strategies, yes.
Coping strategies, right? Because coping, that's a common term, right?
Yes.
People cope with all kinds of things. Coping is kind of dealing, is a way of dealing with things, right?
Yes.
And you talked about, I think in response to the prosecutor questions, you distinguish between formal coping mechanisms and informal coping mechanisms, right?
Yes.
And when you talked about formal mechanisms, you talked about going to the police or the authorities, correct?
Correct.
And when you talked about informal coping mechanisms, you talked about going to family and friends, right?
Objection.
No, we are, yes, lines.
Oh. Yes. I'm
But
sorry.
you didn't mention anyone giving to a civil plaintiff's lawyer, correct?
Correct.
And many people talk to civil plaintiff lawyers for different reasons, right?
Objection.
It's overruled. Can you
Can
read
you
back?
read back the Can you read back the question?
Sure. People might go to a civil plaintiff's lawyer for different reasons, right?
Correct.
And one of them might be to make some money, correct?
I would say they go to civil lawyers to right or wrong.
But some people go to civil lawyers because they want to make a little money based on a claim.
Objection.
Let's move on. When you do your forensic work, the work that you do in the when you do a comprehensive forensic evaluation, that's often in the context of a civil case brought by a civil plaintiff's lawyer, correct?
I do both civil and criminal work.
In the civil context, you do forensic work where there are money damages at stake, right?
Correct.
And that's where you engage in testing to look for the possibility of malingering, right?
Yes.
That's where you approach the person you're interviewing with a highly skepticism, with a healthy skepticism, correct?
Yes.
That's where you have your concerns about motivation, correct?
Yes.
You were talking about memory, right?
Yes.
And you were explaining why people may have hazy memories, why they might recall things in fragments over a period of time, right?
I don't know if I said they recall things in fragments over the time, but their memory can be fragmented.
Let me ask you this hypothetical. Let's say that there is a time when someone has a hazy memory. They recall a few things. They do the best they can at that time, but they recall a few things. Then time two, after they have hired a civil plaintiff's lawyer and they have made a claim for money damages, they now recall details that they didn't recall before.
Objection.
Hold on for 1 second. I'm going to sustain that objection. You can try to rephrase that and ask that question a different way. Sure. You talked about issues with memory, correct?
Yes.
There might be all kinds of reasons why people happen to have new memories after consulting a lawyer, correct?
Objection.
That's sustained. Let me rephrase. You talked about the neurobiology of stress, correct?
Yes.
And you said that neurobiology of stress can explain why people's memories might change over time, correct?
I don't think I said they may change over time. They certainly can be recalled over time based on context and cues. So you can have different time periods where those contexts and cues evoke a memory.
And memories do change over time, correct?
They do.
And a memory issue, a lapse of memory, a forgotten detail, that can be a result of pre-verification, correct?
Prevarication, did you say?
Yes.
As a result of lying?
Yes.
I guess anything is possible.
One moment. One moment, please. We
We
are
are
sending it up.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
We are seeing it up here. Let's take it down.
You understand that there are times when people's memory issues can be related to pre-verification, correct?
Yes.
That's a fancy way of saying there are circumstances in which people may shade the truth, correct?
Correct.
And that's not because of neurobiology of the brain, correct?
Correct.
That's for other motives and reasons, correct?
Yes.
Now, you testified on direct that you have been retained many times as an expert, correct?
Yes.
And you testified in court multiple times as an expert as well, right?
Correct.
So much so that you become comfortable training other experts to testify in court, correct?
I don't know if I train experts to testify in court, but we certainly train mental health professionals and lawyers and judges about the intersection between trauma and the courtroom.
Don't you train them on how to testify in court?
I think I did one training years ago on battered women for the clearinghouse on how to do that, but most of the time the trainers are how to conduct comprehensive forensic assessments.
But you have given people tips on how to prepare and present. Prepare for and present themselves in a courtroom setting, right?
Yes, those were tips for battered women advocates who don't have that level of training and sometimes have to come into court.
And you gave them tips on how to answer questions, both on direct examination and cross examination, correct?
I don't remember the presentation, but probably.
I think what you're referring to, just to be clear, is a webinar you gave in May 2015 entitled Expert Witness Testimony in Cases Involving Domestic Violence, correct?
And who was that by?
That was presented by you and Mary Ann Dutton, correct?
For the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women?
That was 10 years ago, correct?
Yeah,
10 years ago, you were training other experts how to give testimony in domestic violence cases, correct?
correct.
Let me show you the defense exhibit,
Your Honor, I haven't seen this exhibit.
just for the parties.
Do you have a copy for the government?
Yes, just for the parties in the court for now. Parties, lawyers in the court.
Let's have a brief sidebar. How are you using this document?
She just mentioned it. I'm using it to show her bias to the orientation. I'm not going to spend that much time on it, but I'm going to go through some things to show that she has a certain approach and agenda in these types of cases, and that she is essentially not just a clinical psychologist or a forensic psychologist that she testified, but she has become a professional expert.
I understand the relevance, but you can't put it in front of her and try to get into evidence unless there is a basis for doing so. That's what I'm asking. What is the basis?
The basis is bias, and it goes to the orientation and bias of a witness. It's her background. There are other pieces that I want to bring out. For instance, it talks about coping in here, which is something that she testified to substantially. So I want to about talk to her about coping. I am not going to go over every page or spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's relevant for the jury to see. She is not coming here just as a professional psychologist who is learned in the discipline, but she is coming here as someone who has honed herself to be an expert at that.
I understand the relevance, believe me. I understand why you're doing this. But if you're going to attempt to impeach the witness with statements from this document, then you will go through the steps for doing that. If there is a basis, then you can seek admission as a prior inconsistent statement. However, you have got to go through those steps.
I'm not offering it as a prior inconsistent statement, at least not yet. I'm offering it as impeachment in a different sense, that it shows bias. It's not that she made a statement that's false that I'm impeaching. It's a bias to show her orientation. So, respectfully, I don't think that kind of evidentiary foundation is necessary for the admissibility of this.
Miss Steiner, Your Honor, I think the court has a deadline for exhibits that we are seeking to have admitted for both parties for a reason. We have never reviewed this before. I have no idea what's in it or whether it's relevant. I would ask that the court and the government have the ability to review the document. The government doesn't object, like Your Honor is suggesting, to having him question the witness and pursue a line of impeachment potentially about bias. But introducing the document without us even having reviewed it, I have no doubt. Just the things that you are describing.
If you want a couple of minutes, it's on her resume that she provided to us. It's a presentation in her resume that's right on point in this case. There is nothing it won't take. There is nothing. It won't take you very long to review this. I don't mind.
I'm happy to take a recess. I guess you will agree that there isn't in issue in terms of the court's order from the weekend because this is a document that's being used for impeachment purposes. Is that fair? If it is only used for impeachment purposes, Mr. Bach has said that you are not using it for any kind of affirmative purpose. It's purely for impeachment.
This has nothing to do with our case in chief.
If I may, Your Honor, I have had a chance to look through this. My concern is, I think if Your Honor actually reviews it, you will see that the face of the document, as far as I can tell, shows no indications of bias along the lines that counsel just articulated. I think it would be helpful for Your Honor to take a look because in reading through this quickly, I don't see any indications of bias.
I'll lay a foundation, but the bias is that you presented her as someone who has come into the courtroom as a professor at Cornell Will, as someone who is clinically practiced, as someone who is forensic practice. I don't think that's a complete portrayal of the kind of background and energy and motivation that she has here. I think this puts the way that you characterize her in a different light that is biased in motive, and everything biased is always relevant.
If I may respond, I think that Ms. Steiner also elicited how many times she has testified, what kinds of cases she has testified in, and how many times she has been qualified as an expert. I'll note that Ms. Steiner, I think, rushed through that part of her direct examination because we had a sidebar during which we were told to move on past the qualification aspect. Part of this is that her direct was short circuited. We did not mean to suggest that there was any sort of bias here or to create a setup. I am going to ask you, George, to take a brief recess and then we can address this. Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the jury, we have a matter that we need to address, and it may take a few minutes. Rather than you sitting here with that white noise going, which I'm sure is really annoying, I'm going to allow you to retire to the jury room for a few minutes and then we'll bring you back. All rise. Quick question. Are we still going?
How much farther we got?
It saves you on page 176 of 256.
I guess we can finish. You want to finish?
It doesn't matter to me. Can
Yeah.
I need to plug up my laptop right 1 second
Okay.
though.
No problem.
All right.
Miss Sylvia, you there? She must have stepped away. Guys, I can't see any comments or the chat. I'm kind of just reading, so I'm sorry if you guys are asking questions. I apologize.
What was the question?
I'm not sure if it is a question. I was just saying I don't see the chat or the comments. So if there is any questions, I won't be able to see them. We're gonna finish. I think Tiara is just getting her plugging up her laptop.
Okay.
We don't got much left.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm scratching my throat.
That's okay. You tired?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and Mimi said she was in the background. I mean, in the back.
She's not back here.
Oh, she must have dropped. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so where are we at? The court number 2, or did we get past that? A line
on line, the first line where it says jury not present.
Dr. Hugh, let me see.
Or you want to just go? You want to read that, or should we just go to the examination?
We can just go to.
Since that's a sidebar.
2172. The courts of the government doesn't object to the form of the document. It's just a rule for it. Nope. Yep. You want to go to 20? Did we could do that one? 2172.
No, we didn't do that one or the one before. That's what I was asking. Did you want?
Okay. Let's start at the 2172 where it says the court. So it's going to be line 3.
All right, there go Mimi.
Oh, there she is.
All right, so she can be the court.
You want to be the court, Mimi?
Yes, give me the page.
It's going to be 2172, line 3.
Or if you're looking at the page counter, it's page 178.
Okay, I'm
Somebody,
sorry. I was looking at the.
somebody take over while I find the page.
Okay, I'll do it. So the government doesn't object to the form of this document. It's just on a Rule 403 basis. The government doesn't believe that. Well, you've made the objection. Mr. Bach, can you just walk me through how you're getting this in? They view this as a neutral document and not presented as a 403 argument in terms of any prejudice. If document, if the view is as a neutral document, great. What this is a document in which she's received, an organization that's received funding from the Department of Justice Office on Violence Against Women. She testified a moment ago that this was a presentation for battered women advocates. She had testified previously that what she does is provides training for legal professionals and experts. She now describes it as for battered women advocates. Those are people who advocate for a perspective. And she also answered my questions by saying initially that she doesn't do this kind of work, that she doesn't prepare people to appear in court. So without going into the details of my cross, I think I'm going to spend less than 5 minutes on this to let people know that she is in the business, contrary to her testimony on direct, not simply of providing clinical services, not simply providing forensic evaluations, but that she's really someone who participates in a different professional world and in a different professional category, which she has over the last number of years become someone who makes most of her money as a professional witness. And she's got kind of a cottage industry and this kind of general testimony. And I think this is very relevant to our defense. It puts in perspective who she is. With experts, it's very dangerous because they come in with an aura of authority about them based on the discipline. She testified at length about her training in New Haven, her PhDs, and suggesting that her knowledge comes from the world of academia, the world of psychological textbooks, from her own experience. But there's a perspective that forms her testimony that the defense is entitled. The defense is obviously entitled to present a defense, but
Miss Comey, if I'm understanding you correctly, you have no issues with Mr. Bach asking questions about this document.
100%, Your Honor. Oh, shoot, 1 second. 100%, Your Honor. Everything that Mr. Bach just said is, depending how the questions are formed, totally appropriate cross-examination. The issue is presenting this document to the jury has very minimal probative value because, among other reasons, it's a neutral document on its face. It doesn't show bias and it has an extreme risk of confusing the issues. This would be a very confusing document to put in front of the jury, and it would lead us down a slideshow where, on redirect, we would feel obligated to go through it and have her explain essentially this training that she gave so the jury's not confused about what's in this document. It's a sideshow that's not necessary for Mr. Bach to make the points that he wants to. And if Dr. Hughes doesn't remember any of the details of the presentation that Mr. Bach wants to ask about, he can certainly pull the page up to refresh her recollection so that she knows what he's talking about. The point is this should not be shown to the jury.
Judge, the rules for admissibility are broad, and the ability of a defendant to present a defense should not be curtailed.
Right. But you think Miss Comey's point is anything you need to get. You could get through testimony about the fact that a training was given. The document itself, now I'm reviewing it, doesn't really say anything about anything. I mean, it provides information about how to go to court, meaning minding your personal appearances, conduct in courthouse, time management, personal safety. In general terms, it talks about demeanor, listening to questions, nature of expert testimony, not a conversation, know your audience, etc. It doesn't have anything in here about being biased or not giving truthful testimony, anything of that kind. I'm reviewing the whole document. But I think that you've asked Mr. Dr. Hughes if she had and provided any training of this nature. and she indicated she had given a training to advocates. And so I think it's fair, and I think Ms. Comey agrees, that she can be shown the document to refresh her recollection. And she's in fact gave a training to expert witnesses. And you can ask questions along those lines. I'm not seeing a basis under Rule 403, and I now understand the objection for this to go inside evidence, which is a separate issue. So I'm going to sustain the objection to the admission of the document. However, you can ask questions about it. You can refresh the witness recollection using the document. And if the witness denies any of the statements that are in this document, can you potentially introduce this document at that point, or at least the portion of the document that contains the inconsistent statement? Now, Ms. Comey, you had mentioned something about the qualification process, and that, in your view, that it had been short-circuited, which certainly was not the court's intent. Just to make sure we're on the same page, the objection and the reason why the court has asked the defense whether there was an objection to qualification is that in the process of providing her credentials, Dr. Hughes began to provide her substantive opinions in the case, and that is perhaps inadvertent. Perhaps Dr. Hughes did not heed her own advice not to have a conversation on the stand, which came up from time to time. This is the reason for its objection, because instead of just outlining qualifications, she began to provide her substantive opinions, some of which the defense viewed was outside of the bounds of the court's prior ruling. That was the issue.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I will permit, however, on the redirect examination, if there is a missing component that will go into the Rule 702 objection that was raised after the direct examination, and you feel like there's a gap that you need to fill, then can you do that, Mr. Bach, and address it on a recross so we have a full record when the court considers the application?
Thank you so much, Your Honor. And I apologize for misunderstanding the sidebar earlier.
That's what happens when things come up in the heat of the moment.
Thank you, Judge.
Let's have Dr. Hughes back, and then we'll have our jury back. Mr. Bach, you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Hughes, before the break, we were talking about a presentation you gave in 2015 to advocate for battered women, correct?
Correct.
And you made that training session available in the form of a webinar, correct? Tia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Line 10.
I didn't make it available. I believe the organization made it available.
And that was an organization that was funded by the U.S. Department of Justice, correct?
I believe they received a grant from the Violence Against Women Act.
And you gave this presentation, and it was called Expert Witness Testimony in Cases Involving Domestic Violence, correct?
Yes.
So you're giving an audience some pointers on expert appearances and expert witness testimony in cases involving domestic violence, correct?
Correct.
And you were essentially training advocates for battered women to do what they do, correct? What you do, correct?
Not to do what I do, but they don't have the resources available that I do across the country, but to have certain skills and strategies that when they have to go into court, how that might be helpful to them.
And you weren't teaching them how to do clinical work with battered women, right?
Not on this particular presentation, no.
You weren't telling them how to analyze whether a person had been battered or not, or had trauma bond or not, right?
Correct.
You were talking to them about what to do when they get to a courtroom, correct?
I don't know if that was the only thing that the presentation talked about. I haven't seen it in a long time, but certainly how you present in court and how you can convey certain information to a judge or a jury.
Well, there were 4 parts of the presentation, correct?
I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't recall.
Let me see if I can summarize them for you and see if this refreshes your recollection.
Objection.
Grounds?
improper refreshing, Your Honor. He can put up the document if he wants to refresh the witness.
That's overruled. You may proceed. There were 4 parts. Part 1, which is advanced preparation for testimony. Part 2, preparing for court. Part 3, conduct on the stand. The process.
Let's stop there. And you can ask the witness if her memory is at all refreshed.
Does that refresh your recollection that there were 4 parts?
I mean, not really. I like to see it. I trust you, but I did a lot of presentations, so I can't say I recall those 4 parts.
Let's have Dr. Hughes view the exhibit.
Your Honor, can I approach the witness and provide the hard copy?
You may.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me know when you're ready, Dr. Hughes.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you.
Does that refresh your recollection that there were 4 parts?
Yes.
And the 4th part was navigating direct and cross-examination, the content correct.
Yes.
And that's answering questions that a prosecutor might ask on direct, right?
Correct.
And advice on how to answer questions that a defense attorney might ask on cross, correct?
Defense attorney or the prosecutor?
Well, it says navigating direct or cross-examination.
Yes.
So you were teaching people how to navigate both sides, right?
Correct.
On page, I don't know what page number this is. I think it's 500.6. There's a slide about preparing for court, correct?
I don't have numbers on mine, so.
There's a slide preparing for court. We can put it up on your screen if you like.
Yep, I have it.
There you use the word coping, right?
Yes.
You're helping the experts develop coping strategies for dealing with their nerves and their personal needs before they go to court, right?
Yes.
And that reminds us that coping is just a broad term again for things that people do, correct?
It's a psychological term for how people can deal with, different types of situations, some more extreme than others.
Sometimes even experts have to cope, right?
Yes.
Even defense lawyers have to cope, correct?
Yes.
And so you're talking to these experts, these battered woman advocates about that.
Yes.
And you're telling them there's a page called Conduct on the Stand about dealing with objections when they come up in court, right?
Yes.
And dealing with questions about, would this change your mind or would that change your mind, correct?
Yes.
And you and Ms. Dutton are talking to the audience of battered women advocates to tell them how they can advocate a courtroom based on your tips and advice, correct?
Yes. And it would be Dr. Dutton, but yes.
Dr. Dutton, I'm sorry. And one piece of advice you have, this is on the page entitled Conduct on the Stand. The process is know your audience, correct?
Yes.
And the audience is the jury, right?
And sometimes it's a judge. Sometimes it's a bench trial.
You prepared a PowerPoint. You and Dr. Dutton prepared a PowerPoint for this presentation, correct?
Yes.
And the presentation itself consisted of advice and recommendations that you and she gave to the battered woman advocates over a period of about 90 minutes, correct?
I don't recall how long it was, but if you tell me, I agree with that.
You told us you have a clinical practice, you do forensic work, but today most of your income comes from working on court-related matters as an expert, correct?
Today meaning Wednesday?
Today meaning Wednesday or the last few years?
No, that's not correct.
Most of your income comes from court-related work, right?
That's not correct.
What is not correct about that?
Maybe about 60% comes from the courtroom work and 40% from the other work.
Well, my question was, doesn't most of your income come from court-related work?
I don't know how you qualify most, more or less.
60% is more than 50%, correct?
That's correct.
Let's move on. You've now raised your rate to $600 an hour, correct?
It's been that way for a couple years, I believe.
And you've done the work for the federal prosecutors here and in Brooklyn for lower rates, correct?
I don't remember.
In other words, your services aren't in enough demand that you can raise your rate, right?
Mm. I raised my rate commensurate with what other experts at my level of expertise are getting.
At this time in your career, when approximately 60% of your income comes from court related expert work, you're no longer writing and publishing scholarly articles in the field of psychology, correct?
And I wasn't doing that for most of my career. I'm a clinician. I'm a prac- practitioner. That wasn't my role.
But early in your career, I like to call it the 20th century, but back in the 19s, you actually wrote some articles about combat veterans and how children experience trauma. You wrote some articles in academic books and peer reviewed articles, correct?
Right. And that was during graduate school when that's what you're supposed to do. And that's what you do.
The last 25 years, you really haven't done that kind of academic work, correct?
Correct. I'm a clin- mm, I'm a clin-
Clinician.
clinician and a practitioner. That's correct.
And you've talked about the literature and the data, but in the last 25 years, you haven't really been a contributor to that literature or that data, correct?
I've been a contributor to the professional organizations and the training, but not in published papers. That's correct.
And you said you teach at is it Will, right? That's not a full-time faculty position, right?
No, like I said, that's a voluntary faculty position.
That's a tenured position,
That's correct.
and you're not expected or required to do any writing or research as part of that job, correct?
That's correct.
And the Cornell website describes you as an ordinary faculty, but as a volunteer faculty member, correct?
It's called a voluntary faculty member.
There's a different category in the university's employment handbook, correct?
I haven't seen the handbook, but I assume that's true.
And you don't get any income from that, right?
I do not.
Now, you've been doing this for nearly 30 years, I think.
The this being
Good point. Let me rephrase the question. You've been a psychologist since about 1998, correct?
correct.
And you've been doing court related work to a different degree, but you've been doing court related work since 1998, correct?
Correct.
And you've been retained hundreds of times as an expert in relation to court related work, correct?
Correct.
Now, over all those years and all those retentions as an expert, isn't it a fact that you have never came into court, taken the witness stand, and testified in the defense of a man accused of sex crimes?
That's correct. I don't evaluate offenders.
Can I have just a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
Ms. Hughes, before testifying in this case, you had a number of meetings with the prosecutors, correct?
That's correct.
And a number of those meetings were devoted to preparing your testimony in this case, correct?
That's correct.
You went over questions and answers with them in advance, correct?
Correct.
And you met with them about 6 times. Is that correct?
And most of the meetings were I don't have I don't have my log. I don't know, but that sounds about right.
And most of those meetings were in person, correct?
Correct.
One was a video call, correct?
Correct.
Some of those meetings were well over an hour, correct?
Correct.
You also had phone calls and email correspondence with them apart from the meetings.
That's correct.
And you have and you had all of these meetings even though they didn't learn the specific facts of this case, correct?
Correct.
And even though you're providing general testimony that you provided in a number of these cases, of other cases before, correct?
Correct.
So during these 6 meetings, did the prosecutors tell you they wouldn't tell you particular facts? Is that what you're saying?
I don't understand your question.
Let me ask you this. Some of the meetings you had with the prosecutors, in this case were after the defense delivered its opening statements, correct?
Correct. I believe so. The trial had already begun.
So some of the meetings you had were after the defense had disclosed its theory on the case in its opening statements, correct?
Correct.
And some of the meetings you had were after certain key witnesses had been put on the stand and asked questions by both sides, correct?
I believe so.
And the prosecutors met with you after that had occurred, correct?
Correct.
During the meetings, is it your testimony that they didn't tell you the themes of the defense opening statement?
They did not talk to me about the specifics of this case.
They didn't talk to you about the specifics, but let me try and understand what that means. Did they tell you there are particular issues they think you should cover?
No.
You came up with that entirely on your own?
Your Honor, maybe you have a sidebar?
You may. Now, there hasn't been an objection, Mr. Bach, but as you know, anytime an expert witness testifies, they of course have many, many, many discussions with that party to know what they're supposed to testify about. Usually, people don't ask questions about meetings with the party as to whether they were given any direction as to their testimony. And I have to look up whether this applies in the criminal context, but it isn't in the case that usually question about witness preparation is being a fault and a reason to suspect the credibility of the witness is usually out of bounds.
It's different in a criminal context. I think you'll see the certain bounds. I think you'll see that certain bounds were crossed here
By who?
by the other side. I hope I didn't cross any bounds. I will confess if I did. But people are very careful about these things. As you no doubt know, there are things such as consultant experts, testifying experts. People are very careful about how they draw the lines. In criminal cases, especially, preparation is fair game when someone's not in the privilege. She's not in the privilege.
It's not a privilege issue.
I'm not going to get into details, but I do think it's fair for me, based on the foundation that I've laid, to say, my goodness, you say you're just providing general testimony. Why not? What's going on here? That's fair.
You're certainly addressed that. Let me hear from Mr. Steiner.
Your Honor, the government believes that based on this line of questioning, defense has opened the door as to why the government needed to meet with this witness on so many occasions. In large part, it was because the government was very concerned about cueing her testimony towards the court's limited order, which, as Your Honor knows, very cut down on substance of her expert testimony and was different from how she's testified previously, and the government was working to ensure to the best of its ability that this witness was going to be able to answer questions in that manner.
And that's fair, Mr. Bach. You don't have an issue with that handled in the right way.
No, I will say I don't doubt that we're hearing what we're hearing, but the 3,500 material seems to suggest that those meetings were about a number of topics. They did share the court's rulings, but you could have on the phone handled.
So, Mr. Bach, so Mr. Bach can continue with this line. I take you don't have any objection to this questioning. You just wanted to make sure that once it's turned over to you, that you can explain the context without running afoul of any rules. And Mr. Bach has said that you can, in fact, do that.
I just want to make clear we didn't want to start this line of questioning without flagging it for everyone that we think this opens the door to the fact that she is not being permitted to testify about many topics she's testified in the past, and that she was instructed to not use certain terms in the literature, and that she was instructed to not discuss certain topics because that is why.
I think that's going to open the door in a different way. But I think you can say that based on rulings by court and legal issues in this case, There needed to be significant discussion to make sure that the testimony fell within those bounds.
Thank you, Your Honor. That is why we want to respond this line of calls. So thank you. That's
Your
for you.
Honor, there's sometimes a standard, very short instruction that can be given that basically says the fact that a witness met with lawyers to prepare for the testimony is neither here nor there. And it's standard instruction. Neither side requested it. If someone does, I'm just saying, all right, that's fine.
I think we would, but thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Bach, you may proceed.
Did they suggest, without getting into any specific facts, topics that they wanted to cover with you?
I mean, as you know, Mr. Bach, our disclosure was submitted way before the trial even started. So the general topic areas were already outlined and discussed. It was really, with utmost respect to the government lawyers, me educating them on what would be appropriate for me to say to educate this jury.
So, you knowing nothing about the facts of this case, having spent no time working on it, needed 6 to 8 meetings to educate these lawyers about what they should hear from you?
Well, to educate how you're going to present that information in a way that it makes it digestible and meaningful.
Were you giving them a training seminar on how to present expert testimony in domestic violence cases?
Objection, argumentative.
I'll withdraw it. Now, one of the things that you did with these prosecutors was you helped them write briefs.
I don't think I helped them write briefs.
Did they share drafts?
Your Honor, can we have a sidebar, please?
Very brief. I'll make it shorter than the last one.
Your Honor, I'm so sorry to ask for another sidebar, but I want to stop before we go down this path of introducing in front of the jury pretrial motion practice and pretrial litigation and legal issues.
Where are we going?
I don't have to show the exhibits.
Just tell me where are we going. I don't understand.
She sent proposed language for briefs. They shared drafts of briefs with her before submitting them to your honor. There are red lines that she provided when she makes legal argument. She's working with them as part of their team to advocate in this court. I think it shows her clear bias. I think it shows the level. I shows the level of where she's coming from in this case. I think they crossed the line by having the expert engage in that kind of process. That's not typical happens. That doesn't typically happen with an expert. You don't show them a brief on a legal issue and ask them to help you write it. And I think it shows her bias. It's evidence of bias. They might not like it because it's a little unusual for an expert to be helping prosecutors write a brief.
I don't have this brief. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'll show it to you.
If I can clarify, first of all, with the notice, we obviously showed it to Dr. Hughes so that she can confirm it for accuracy.
You mean the disclosure?
The disclosure.
This is not that.
With respect to briefing and demotion in limine practice, we would submit like the legal analysis. Actually, not the legal analysis. You mean
You mean on Dr. Hughes' report?
the psychological.
Girl.
The, when we were describing the psychological arguments.
To exclude Barty as well.
And the psychological arguments that had been made potentially by Bartley. We provided it just to understand what the statement was and for her to confirm accuracy of any psychological arguments that we may be making. But we were not providing any factual argument or anything of that nature that was specific to the case.
Assuming that's the case, Dr. Barty is the rebuttal expert for Dr. Hughes. So it would seem natural that Dr. Hughes would take a look at what the government was saying with respect to Dr. Barty. That's not coming in.
That's not the issue. Let us show you the document so you can exactly see what happened.
I also will note any red line was not created by Dr. Hughes. Again, it was in consultation, her giving input. The government will make its own red line. It wasn't providing.
Documents, including emails, where they say, thank you for your edits. Let us show you the documents. I'm not making this up. And it's defense evidence. I'll show you the documents. The government provided this to us, as they should, and consistent with their obligations, with 3,500 materials because of statements of Dr. Hughes. These are drafts of their brief to keep out Dr. Barty, to keep out his rebuttal testimony. I'm showing you a number of documents. You can see there are red lines here, and there are red lines throughout the brief, and they're sharing with her. And
Let me see.
then there's more. They give her a subsequent draft with further, comes back with further red lines. I'll give this to you in a second, Your Honor. But then there's email correspondence from the government thanking her for her edits and asking if she has any more. I'll find that for you, Your Honor. But then Dr. Hughes is emailing. This is from Dr. Hughes, an email to them about how to argue a legal point about what's after cross examination, making legal arguments for them.
And why? When we had the jury leave the room so that we could address the other issue, did you not raise this issue? Which you must have known what was going to come up. You knew this was going to come up. It was a part of your cross examination. So why didn't you raise it at the time so we don't have the jury sitting here?
Forgive me. Honestly, what I'm doing was I'm trying to concentrate. I'm doing my best. But they produced this to us in 3,500 because they knew this wasn't just government work product. These were her statements that she worked with them on this. They knew this was an issue.
All right.
As I stated earlier, Your Honor, Dr. Hughes did not input these edits and send it back to us. We would have a conversation with her over the phone, and she would provide inputs and to confirm accuracy. We wanted to make sure we went through that process. Then the government would input red line edits. In fact, he would produce to the defense because we believe that at least a portion of that were erred on the side of caution. If any portion of that could have been part of her statement, we produced that red line.
Your Honor, regardless, hold on. We got to have one person. Sorry.
Look at this. This is a summary of a meeting with Dr. Hughes. View draft of MIL, motion in limine, and made edits in the attached. That's what she did in the meeting. That's what she did in the meeting and the call with Dr. Hughes. You can share documents on the screen. You can talk through the text. Everyone knows how to do that. She's reporting. She reviewed the draft brief with Dr. Hughes and made edits.
Your Honor, I want to clarify we will send over the redacted version of any brief. So, again, it would not have any of the facts of the case.
What's the nature of the objection to Mr. Bach asking questions about this? His point is this was produced as 3,500 material because these were statements of Dr. Hughes.
Right.
And so why isn't Mr. Bach permitted to ask questions along those lines?
So,
I think the judge said only one of us could talk. So I think the same rules should apply to the prosecutors, with all due respect. Fair. Miss Steiner?
I mean, I think they can ask some amount of questions to do review. Did the government provide documents that you confirm for accuracy? However, they want to pose it. They can't get into any of the government's legal briefing in the case.
That's true. They can't put up as 3,500 material. They wouldn't be permitted to put that up. How are you going to get that into evidence?
I think I'm going to get it in that she was consulted with briefs about briefs.
Miss Steiner? Miss Steiner said you could do that.
I want to say one of the briefs was to exclude an expert. One might disagree with her.
He's not going to put anything up on the screen. He's not going to show anything to the jury.
We understand any substantive legal dispute is not something that can come in, that the government will object to being asked about in front of the jury.
I'm not
Oh,
asking about who's right and
hold on. You have no objection. As the rule matter, that a question is Dr. Hughes, did you consult with government on certain filings that made in this case? No objection to that.
No objection.
Then you can ask questions and that gets you where you need to be. I'm not permitting testimony and review of various briefs in this case, especially when the briefing that we're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, has to do with the issue that came up with the admissibility of both Dr. Hughes' testimony and in response, Dr. Barty's testimony. It would be natural in reviewing Dr. Barty's testimony to have your own expert, who is the person being responded to, review what was being filed to make sure that nothing was being missed concerning Dr. Barty's testimony. I don't think that goes to bias in any way, shape, or form. But you don't have an objection to the general point about there have been some consultation with Dr. Hughes. So that's what we're going to do, and let's proceed. Anything further?
I do think I have it to orient this is after her disclosure was made. So there's no confusion.
Of course, there's no objection to that. They just don't want you putting this stuff up and making sideshow out of it. And I agree with that. Members of the jury, I was wrong about this one being shorter than the last one. I apologize. We're going to get some music actually put in as opposed to white noise next time. Mr. Bach, you may proceed.
You guys want to stop here and maybe start back tomorrow at the 2201?
Fine with me. It don't matter.
Yes, that's fine.
Is that good? Is Miss Sylvia there? She might be asleep. I can't see the chat, but thank you guys for hanging in with us. Thanks, Tiara. Thanks, Mimi. It was a lot. Today was a lot.
It was definitely a lot.
This had to been a long day.
Yes, and that tongue twist with that doctor.
It was a lot.
And me, I got my flipper off, so I got a lisp out of nowhere.
I can't see the chat, so but thank you guys for hanging in with us, and you guys have a good night, and we'll see you or talk to you guys tomorrow. All right.
All right. Good
Everybody
night.
have a good night. Good night, Tiara. Good night, Mimi.
Good night.
Thank you, Miss
Good night,
Sylvia.
Mimi.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you for watching the infamous Sylvia channel, where laughter and fun make up our panel. Together we build this digital spree. We appreciate you and our growing family. With mods by our side and chat flowing free in this online space. It's just you and me. We laugh until tears roll down like the rain. In this virtual world, you ease all my pains. We're family, not just a show. Every click and comment makes us grow. Mods and chat, keeping the vibe so right. Together we shine like stars in the night. We cherish the moments, the highs and lows, from the latest gossip to stories untold. You're more than a viewer, you're part of the crew in this space of ours. It's all because of you. This digital world where emotion is shared. Every post and reaction showing we care. The love is real in this virtual domain. With every sign and joys we'll go gain. We're a family, not just a show. Every click and comment makes us grow. Mars in check, keeping the vibe so right. Together we shine like stars in the night. We're a family, not just a show. Every click and comment makes us grow. Mars in check, keeping the vibe so right. Together we shine like stars in the night. This digital world where emotion is shared. Every post and reaction showing we care. The love is real in this virtual domain. With every sign and joys what we'll gain. We're a family, not just a show. Every click and comment makes us grow. Mars in check, keeping the vibe so right. Together we shine like stars.